Chapter 1187. Fifth Ring Dome. It was the beginning of a new day. The red sun gushed out, and the sunlight shone on the earth. The fantasy of the snowy mountain was particularly eye-catching in the early morning. People would never get tired of looking at it. After the morning lesson, the dome quickly regained its vitality. The number of sword traces in the sky suddenly increased, whistling back and forth. It was full of vitality. Reverend Yin Quan looked enviously at the increasingly arrogant sword lights in the sky. He sighed, turned around silently, and began his daily chores. He had been doing these daily chores for dozens of years, and he would continue to do them until he died. His job was in the Sword Soul Hall. There were tens of thousands of soul lamps in the dome. It needed someone to take care of it every day. Of course, he was not the only one. There was another reverend who accompanied him. However, the reverend was a little old, and the family's internal affairs were more troublesome recently. Therefore, he was more responsible. Yin Quan used to be a cultivator with a little potential. He used the heavenly Tao to open a path. He worked hard and took advantage of the heavenly Tao to ascend to the Yuanying level. Unfortunately, for swordsmen, he did not rely on his strength to ascend to the dome. He could not change the way swordsmen did things in the outside world. The consequence of being free and easy with the sword was that his foundation was damaged. Being assigned such a leisurely job could be considered as spending his old age in peace. There was nothing to complain about. He could live a few hundred more years, and he was very open-minded. In the Sword Soul Hall, cleaning was not a problem. More importantly, he had to be aware of the situation in the Sword Soul Hall. He had to report the situation to the various halls at any time. For example, the external sword disciples had to report to the Sword Chi Rushing Heaven Pavilion. The internal sword disciples had to report to the Chaotic Thunder Hall. The situation of cultivators above the Yuanying level had to be reported as soon as possible. Then, he had to wait for the higher-ups to investigate the situation before making a decision. However, this had nothing to do with him. This was not only for work, but also for personal matters. Some cultivators went out for adventures and important missions and did not return for a long time. Their close friends would use their connections to come to the Sword Soul Hall in order to be the first to know the news of their friends. They might not really be able to do anything but purely for peace of mind. Swordsmen were still very dangerous outside, especially those Yuanying Jinren who could explore the universe. He had a lot of such favors. They were either acquaintances, friends, or fellow disciples. Therefore, in the dome, although the Sword Soul Hall didn't have much wealth, they had a lot of connections. Who didn't have a few friends outside of the dome realm? Who didn't have friends and relatives to send them to? All of this required the first news from Soul Hall. The dome swordsman's dilemma was that he had to maintain a good relationship with Reverend Yin Quan of the Soul Hall, yet he would rather never hear any news about him. Taoist master Yin Quan carried out his own management step by step. In the past few months, the Sword Soul Hall could be considered peaceful. It was inevitable that Jean Dan, a Foundation establishment cultivator, would have an accident every day. This was also a normal pace. However, the major repairs were fine. There was no bad news. While he was working, he suddenly felt something strange in the depths of the Soul Hall. That was where the soul lamps of the great cultivators gathered. His heart sank. In a flash, he had already arrived at the Soul Hall. There were nearly 1,000 soul lamps neatly arranged, burning with brilliance. However, one of them was completely extinguished. There was no vitality. He hurriedly identified it. Under the lamp was a very familiar name, Cigarette, but he wasn't familiar with this person. They hadn't even met once. However, during his time as a Foundation establishment cultivator, this person was the brightest pearl in the dome. He was a person that all swordsmen in the same realm had to look up to. Not only the outer sword, but also the inner sword. He had beaten Xuanyuan's inner and outer swords and swept through the Five Rings Foundation establishment cultivators' rankings. He was truly a genius that appeared once in 1,000 years. His appearance provided the lifeless outer sword lineage with too many reasons to be proud. Later, not long after this person formed the Jean Dan, he didn't stay in the Five Rings to shine. It seemed that he was sent to Blue Sky. After that, he didn't know. To say something shameful, he didn't have the qualifications to know such a leading figure at that time. The reason why he paid attention was because of a request from an inner sword reverend, Yin Bo. He owed this reverend a favor. He sighed inwardly. No matter how outstanding one was, who could truly escape death? Relatively speaking, it was already quite good that he was able to stay in this crippled state to guard the soul hall. He shook his hand to send out a sword message. Was Yin Bo at the mountain gate? In less than half an hour, a sharp aura rushed towards the soul hall. It was a bit rude, but Yin Quan understood. The loss of a close friend was a heavy blow to every cultivator's heart. The higher the realm, the more so. Close friends were hard to come by. Everyone shared the same heart. He could understand, so he didn't say anything even if it was a bit presumptuous. However, the one who rushed in wasn't Yin Bo, but a female swordsman who was as cold as a fairy. Yin Quan was even more familiar with her. Who didn't know of the ice sword deity's beautiful name as an outer sword lineage? She was quite famous in the Dome Peak, and even in the Five Rings Yuanian group. Although he didn't know the inside story, he still conscientiously fulfilled his duty. He didn't speak any nonsense because there was no need for superfluous words in this kind of situation. Senior sister, over here. Yin Quan led the way to the soul lamp that had just been extinguished. Smokey stared fixedly at the soul lamp, countless images flashing through her mind. That bouncy, sunny, nonchalant, and wretched figure flashed back and forth. She had once thought that if they had to compare who would go the longest among them, it would definitely be this nonchalant fellow. But now, was it extinguished just now? Just now. I immediately sent out a message. Senior sister, did this happen during a mission? I haven't seen him in the Dome Peak for many years. Yin Chung shook her head. It's been 500 years. Who knows what mission he's on? Her expression was normal, but the more she was like this, the more Yin Quan knew that something was wrong. Cultivators were deep and reserved. He had seen this kind of situation many times and already knew how to comfort her. Senior sister, in the universe, there are too many factors that affect soul lamps. For Foundation Establishment Jindan, once their soul lamp is extinguished, it's very difficult to reignite it. But it's different for Yuaniing perfected cultivators. With my experience of guarding the soul hall for 100 years, there's a 10% to 20% chance that their soul lamp will reignite at some point in the future. This is also the reason why the soul hall continues to keep perfected cultivators' soul lamps for hundreds of years. Therefore, everything is still unknown. Everything is possible. Yin Chung was very calm. Thank you. Good people don't live long, but scourges live for thousands of years. I believe that a pest like him wouldn't leave quietly like this. How could it be possible without making some noise? After leaving the soul hall, Yin Cheng's mood wasn't as indifferent as her appearance. As a rational person, she of course understood the meaning of Yin Quan's words. In fact, it was very biased. If a perfected cultivator's soul lamp was extinguished, it was worth looking forward to reigniting it. However, the possibility of this happening to Yuanian cultivators was very small. She was very clear that the probability of these two levels was mixed together to comfort her. What exactly happened? She didn't know either, but she decided to make a trip to Qingkong. First, she wanted to try to become a monarch in her hometown. Second, she wanted to find a reason why this guy disappeared for 400 years. If it was the will of the heavens, she couldn't do anything. If it was man-made, there had to be an end. Chapter 1188. Smoky Puppet went straight to the sword aura rushing heaven pavilion. She planned to do this by herself, and she couldn't wait for Yin Bo to come back. Also, it wasn't good to trouble too many people with this kind of personal matter. Recently, there seemed to be a big movement in the fifth ring. Something was brewing, and it wasn't peaceful. Go to Blue Sky? Why? True, Lord Rue frowned. There were too many things to do, and he hadn't seen the daily report from the Soul Hall. Smoky Puppet was very natural. Marshal Uncle, you know that I'm from Blue Sky. Now that I've accumulated enough, I want to break through, but there's something bothering me. I can't calm down. Junior brother cigarette, but soul lamp extinguished this morning. The last news I know of him was from the Blue Sky Mountain 500 years ago. Since then, there's no more news. I want to go and take a look." True Lord Rue raised his eyebrows. "Cigarette, but I remember him. Back then, he caused a lot of trouble at the dome. Did he go overboard?" Sword Aura rushing heavens Yuanying is unreliable. Since he became a nascent soul, he hasn't returned to the mountain even once. And there's no news at all. And you can go and take a look, but don't worry. It's been 500 years, and many things can't be traced back. There will be some big movements in the Fifth Ring recently, and they need people. No matter what you can find in Blue Sky, you have to pay attention to the dome's conscription order. Listen to me at any time." Smoky Puppet nodded. "Marshal Uncle, is it a joint operation in the Fifth Ring? Or is it the usual interstellar communication?" True Lord Rue shook his head. These things were originally the sect's secrets, and it wasn't good to say too much. However, for a strong Yuanying like Smoky Puppet, it wasn't good to keep a secret. It's not an ordinary hunting, but a targeted elimination. The Great Tao has collapsed, and there will always be people who forget the pain after the scar is healed. We need to remind them. Otherwise, they won't know how to restrain themselves and will be restless. This is a very big operation, and there are many targets. Therefore, the people are a little stretched. Smoky Puppet understood. Will it be fast? True Lord Rue smiled. How could such a big operation be fast? Do you think that those Dharma veins can move at any time like our sword vein? There will be news within 100 years, so it won't delay your business. Also, let me say something. That cigarette, but is not a sign of premature death. Don't worry too much. The future of the universe will change, and there will be more and more strange things. What we need to do is to stay calm and not be blinded by momentary hatred. Smokey left silently. Everyone was trying to persuade her, but made her worried instead, even if she was actually thinking the same thing. All he wanted was a peace of mind. All these years, she had been preparing to become a monarch. Somehow, she always felt that something was wrong, as if she had forgotten something very important, so she had not done anything. It was only now that she understood what she was worried about deep down in her soul. She might miss out on Xuan Yuan's big operation, but she couldn't miss out on her own feelings. Qing Kong. She set sail from there, and now she was going to start from there again. It was also a cycle. She left a jade slip for Yin Bo, explaining her intentions in detail. She emphasized that she could handle this matter alone and that there was no need to make a big fuss about it. Even if more people came, it would be useless. Everything was ready, and she boarded the ferry to Qing Kong. Her mood slowly calmed down. For 100 years? What kind of mission would require 400 years? Based on her understanding of that guy, this couldn't be a mission from a sect. It was more likely that he took matters into his own hands. Then, he got stuck somewhere and couldn't come back. It must be like this. Lu Xiaoyi stayed in Echo Valley with the cultivators of Zhou Xian, witnessing the vigorous tide of Heaven's Choice Masters. There didn't seem to be any organization. A large number of cultivators flocked over. Yuanying perfected monarchs. Fortunately, Jindan didn't reach Foundation establishment. Otherwise, even with the size of Echo Valley, it wouldn't be able to handle the crowd of the entire continent. In just a short month, the number of cultivators in Echo Valley increased explosively. Tens of thousands of cultivators swarmed in. Many of them were here to watch the fun. Of course, there were also some who truly wanted to compete with the cultivators of the origin world. No one could tell for sure. Not every Heaven's Choice cultivator is willing to leave the Heaven's Choice continent. There are those who wholeheartedly want to leave, and there are those who have firm beliefs and are prepared to defend their homeland. This is a clash of ideals. No one is right or wrong. Most of them are those who can't make up their minds and are following the crowd. We want to influence these hesitant cultivators and let them see the ability of the cultivators of the origin world. We want to show them the strength of the Zhou Xian upper realm. A successful diplomatic mission can cause many Heaven's Choice cultivators to give up on the idea of going to the origin world. This is the meaning of our arrival. Even if we can influence 10% or 20% of them, considering the sheer number of Heaven's Choice cultivators, it's still a shocking number. Hua Yuan sighed. It's impossible to have more Heaven's Choice cultivators than the origin world. There's no comparison, but the problem is that they are more concentrated. On a single continent, they could come and fight whenever they were summoned. Even if it's just a small part of their strength, it's still unbearable for any origin world. Blackstar licked his lips. 45 against tens of thousands, or even more. Just thinking about it makes me excited. It's a war of attrition. Sooner or later, you'll be worn down to death. They're all experienced fighters and know what this means. The so-called tag team battle doesn't mean that the Heaven's Choice cultivators will come one by one to bully you. They're not that weak, and they won't be so shameless in front of everyone. They're all major cultivators, so this kind of victory is meaningless. The tag team battle that Blackstar was talking about was the way to fight, the foundation, and the trump cards. In a battle between cultivators, 30% relied on strength, 30% relied on knowing the enemy, and 30% relied on decisiveness when facing the enemy. If they were in the same realm, it would be very difficult to crush them with strength. Everyone was Yuanying, so who would dare to say that they could crush everyone? Knowing the enemy was very important. Knowing the opponent's trump cards, methods, habits, and specialties was the beginning of victory. When cultivators suddenly met, many times they would be destroyed because they didn't understand the enemy. But if you fought 1, 3, or even 8, then what secret trump cards would you have? The opponents who came up later were all targeted. Only those who were confident would come up. No matter how strong a person was, their trump cards were limited. This was the meaning of tag team battle that Blackstar was talking about. When everything was clearly seen by the opponent, your tactical choices would be infinitely limited and limited. In the end, you could only rely on gambling to continue your victory. There is no such thing as eternal luck in the world. Lu Xiaoyi said softly. It can't be an endless challenge, right? There's always a limit. The Sun God ancestors can't tolerate such a tag team battle. That would lose the meaning of being a diplomatic mission. They have to be shameless, right? Daoist Yushan nodded. Exactly. The 3 Sun God senior brothers are talking to them about this. There's no hurry. Take it slow. Lu Xiaoyi laughed in his heart. This was something that couldn't be discussed. It was probably just a game between the 2 sides. Since they were a diplomatic mission in name and had agreed to Zhou Xian's mission in principle, they had to do enough to save face. Finally, it would be a small and silent competition, even if the 2 sides actually valued the last one the most. Chapter 1189. The sky was blue, and the grass was green, but the people of Zhou were somewhat aggrieved on this diplomatic trip. They had no freedom, and there was nothing they could do. As they waited, more and more cultivators of Heaven's Choice gathered. It wasn't until there were 30,000 to 40,000 Yuanying Supremes in Echo Valley that the number of cultivators slowly stabilized. This took half a year, which was also the approximate time it took for the people of Heaven's Choice to rush over after hearing the news. In other words, after half a year of arguing, the Yang gods were finally almost done. They began the tedious ceremony. In this regard, the people of Heaven's Choice were no less inferior to the people of the origin world. In terms of etiquette, although the architecture was lackluster, the reception of personnel was indeed very imposing. The scene of tens of thousands of people undergoing major repairs was simply unimaginable in the origin world. Of course, the introduction of the hosts of both sides was limited to the Yang God Supremes. There were only 3 of them on Zhou Xian's side, and there were more than 30 on Heaven's Choice's side. Presumably, the countries they represented were countries that intended to go to the origin world. Heaven's Choice was too big, and there were too many countries. Even the people of Heaven's Choice themselves couldn't figure out the ideological tendencies and cultivation concepts among them, let alone outsiders like Zhou Xian. This was under the condition that many people hadn't come yet, or were secretly watching. Next was the never-changing theme of the cultivators' meeting. The preaching of the Tao and the acting of methods were all done by the Yang God Supremes. No one else was qualified. It had to be said that it was very shocking and ingenious. At least, It was like this for all the Yuanian cultivators, including Lu Xiaoyi. At this time, only fools would think about the possible battles in the future. Smart people wouldn't let go of any opportunity to learn, especially in this kind of situation. No one would use things they weren't familiar with to fool others. Everyone did their best and didn't dare to hide anything. This was also a competition between the Yang God Supremes, and it was a battle of words. They couldn't personally participate because they were now at the highest level of the cultivation world in the universe. If they started a fire, there would be no way to clean it up. This dragged on for a few more months. Fortunately, everyone here was at least at the Yuanian level, so they were all able to sit still. With the Tao demonstration method, they wouldn't feel bored. From the point of view of the deduction method, the Yang God of Heaven selection was definitely more colorful because they had more people. However, the three Yang gods of the main world were also very powerful. They were all from the most powerful sects in Zhouxian. There were no weaklings among them. Once they displayed their methods, they had their own aura, which was not inferior to the Heaven selection at all. Just as the Yuanian girls were mesmerized by the scene, the Changdi Taoist transmitted his divine sense to them. The final friendly competition has been decided. Let's not engage in a group battle first. Let's just fight one-on-one and rely on our individual strength. This was the main point. It was precisely because the future domain war would definitely be a team battle that it was impossible for them to show off their teamwork. They thought that they would have an advantage in the future so that they could remain calm. A one-on-one battle was the most primitive and direct method, and it was also the best way to measure the strength of both sides. 45 against tens of thousands were the rules. Black Star was very interested because he could not think of a way to solve the problem of the huge disparity in numbers between the two sides. Most of the people watching the Heaven selection were not organized, which meant that it was impossible to defeat a single person and subdue all of them. There would always be people who were unhappy, and there would always be people who thought highly of themselves. The Changdi Taoist side. After all the discussion, there's actually no good way. In the end, the Yang God Senior Brothers still felt that it was best to use benefits to move people. Not only could it raise the bar, but could also dissuade the endless, meaningless challenges. The principle is that each side will take turns to have one person go on stage and propose their own bet. Those who are willing to bet will place their bets, and the winner will take all, one round after another, until no one from one side can go on stage. Black Star smiled. What you mean is, for example, if it's my turn to go on stage and I place a bet of 100 purple, the person on the other side will also have to place a bet of 100 purple to be my opponent. The reverse is also the same? Yu Chuan smiled. Exactly. Hua Yuan also asked, what do you mean until no one from one side can go on stage? The Heaven selection will definitely not consider this problem. There are only 45 of us. Will we all be killed? Will we be beaten down? Or will we be able to make our own decisions? Yu Chuan said seriously, make your own decisions. But do you think that in such an occasion, other than being heavily injured and unable to fight, you can make your own decisions? That's right. Bearing the pressure of the domain's safety, one's Tao heart, under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, it was even harder to play the hero here than to play the hero. This was not a joke, but a single cowardice would cause irreparable damage to one's state of mind. Do we fight here? What's the order? Is it true monarch first, then Yuanying, or according to the sect? Lu Xiaoyi asked. Yu Chuan pointed to the ruins. There, at the original location of the Impermanence Great Tao Steel. A few decades ago, the Impermanence Great Tao Steel collapsed, and the Great Tao Steel here was also destroyed. But although the steel intent was destroyed, the steel realm still remained. Cultivators can still go in and fight. It's like an extra-dimensional space visible to the outside world. Originally, when the Great Tao Tablet was in good condition, even a half-immortal wouldn't be able to damage it in the slightest. But now it's different. Even a Yang spirit would be able to beat it until it's on the verge of collapse. Only primordial spirit, Yin spirit, and nascent soul will be able to enter undamaged. Especially nascent soul, you can do whatever you want. This is the battlefield for this competition, and also a gift from the Heaven Selection to give us the chance to experience the remnant intent of the innate Great Tao steel. Hua Yuan asked a very interesting question. The recently collapsed Great Tao steel, there are still remnants of the steel space? Then why isn't it a massacre? Why is it impermanence? Yu Chuan said meaningfully, because the Heaven Selection wants to see change, and not endless slaughter. From the choice of location, we can see that the Heaven Selection is still very wary of Zhou Xian. What we need to do is to deepen their view, so that when they make a choice, they will take the initiative to avoid our Zhou Xian upper realm. It was very reasonable, and the three Yuaning agreed. Black Star smiled and asked, Marshal Uncle, what if the opponent is rich and we can't afford a bet? Or someone like Senior Marshal Brother Hua, who has a thick waist, if he takes out 10,000 purple purity, the Heaven Selection won't dare to bet. Wouldn't that be awkward? Yu Chuan smiled and said, Black Star, don't talk big. If you have more than 300 strands of purple purity, I'll call you Marshal Uncle. Hua Yuan is the same. His Tao partner is very strict, and she doesn't allow him to bring too much spiritual vigor. Everyone knows that this time, the main purpose of this trip is to fight, so they won't be trapped in some strange phenomenon. Who would be willing to bring too much spiritual vigor with them? As for the Heaven Selection, although they are the landlords, it's convenient for them to use spiritual vigor. But if the stakes are too high, it'll be a guilty conscience. Let's just not go up and see how he'll get out of this. As the few of them chatted, they understood most of Xiao Bai's skills. This was also what the other Zhou Xian upper realm cultivators were doing. This kind of fighting method could control most of the meaningless and low-quality challenges. Unless you were confident, who would be willing to lose precious spiritual vigor? After all, it was rare for Lu Xiaoyi to obtain 150,000 strands of jade purity in one go in the cave of the ultimate ruins. In fact, for most of the cultivators, it was rare to see someone with 1,000 strands of purple purity, which was equivalent to 10,000 strands of jade purity. It was a rare occurrence, and who would bet their entire fortune on a victory? Of course, it was a different story for those who had the background of a country or the backing of a Tao state system. Only these selected experts were their real opponents. Chapter 1190. The preaching finally came to an end. As the host, the people of Heaven's Choice first sent out their Yuaning cultivator, an ordinary-looking skinny Taoist. In the cheers of tens of thousands of people of Heaven's Choice, the Taoist cupped his fists and bowed. He stood on the remnants of the impermanence Tao tablet and threw out a storage ring. 200 Ziqing. I'm the withered tree of Ji country. Please enlighten me, guest from afar. Zhou Xian and the other two young gods were silent. This was their bearing. They couldn't hide their divine consciousness from others. There were dozens of young gods here, and their small movements were like fireflies in the dark. They couldn't hide from others. The disciples should solve their own problems. This was also the bearing of the first world in the universe. Even if they were pretending, they had to keep pretending. The young gods pretended to be calm, but the essence soul perfected cultivators below them naturally had to bear their own responsibilities. The 9 essence soul cultivators of Zhou Xian's 9 upper sects were the dispatchers for this competition. Of course, when it was the perfected cultivators' turn, they also had to go on stage. Primordial soul perfected Lord Wanyan creation immediately revealed the general background of this person. Zhou Xian was very cautious in his work. This was also their usual characteristic. Long before they knew that they were going to be sent to Heaven's Choice, they specially selected a few old perfected lords who had been traveling around Heaven's Choice for a long time. They did not dare to say that they knew everything here like the back of their hands, but they could still give a general idea of things. The foundation of Ji country is the Khanate Thunder Great Tao. This person should be one of the best among them. Although I don't know him, looking at his actions, he is already able to restrain his lightning and not let it leak out. It should be a deliberate arrangement by Heaven's Chosen to give us a show of strength. Perfected cultivator Qingwei sneered. You think you can win just because you learned the Thunder Tao? What a joke. Senior Brothers, who specializes in thunder and lightning, or the Tao realm. I can recommend one or two. We can't let this guy show off. In short, there was no arrogance or conceit in her words. This was a huge matter that concerned the entire Zhou immortal domain. It was not to be taken lightly. What Qing Wei's primordial spirit meant was that the three nascent soul stage cultivators did not target the Thunder Tao realm cultivators. Exposing their own shortcomings was also a pragmatic attitude. Human Sect's perfected cultivator smiled. In that case, let Human Sect take the lead. Huahu, go test this Thunder Warrior's strength. Among the cultivators from Zhou Xian, a tall and sturdy man suddenly stood up. He didn't have the arrogance of the first battle, but he had the spirit of the first battle. Lu Xiaoyi nodded inwardly. The cultivators from Zhou Xian who came this time were all elites among elites. It was clear that Zhou Xian had done their best. He also took out a storage ring with 200 purple purities inside. The two of them jumped into the space of the Impermanence Tao tablet. As soon as he entered, there was a series of booms. Purple lightning as thick as a bowl had already struck down, striking the bearded Taoist squarely on his body. However, he seemed completely unprepared. In the next moment, the hundreds of thousands of pores on the bearded Taoist's skin opened up, and his entire body swelled up as if he had been struck by lightning. Powerful lightning energy leaked out from the hundreds of thousands of pores, and after the lightning energy passed through his body, it turned into hundreds of thousands of strands of white gas. It was as if he was in a thick fog. The white light didn't shoot out aimlessly. Instead, it condensed into a white dragon in the air, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, and swallowing Kumu whole. This was the first time Lu Xiaoyi had seen a cultivator from the Human Sect in action. He had to admit that the pores technique of the human body was indeed mysterious. In fact, it wasn't only limited to the pores, but also the secrets of the entire human body. This was the Human Sect. They had fully unleashed the potential of their bodies. Once energy attacks like lightning hit their bodies, they could immediately convert it into their own attack power. The entire process was smooth and fluid, without any sluggishness. It was as if the two of them were performing a spell together. Tens of thousands of cultivators cheered. When a real cultivator saw a miraculous technique that made their eyes light up, they didn't care whether they were on the enemy's side or on the enemy's side. If it was good, it was good. There was nothing to hide. Kumu's expression was normal, and he didn't back down. Just like that, he allowed the white light dragon to swallow him whole. At the same time, lightning flashed around his body. When it came into contact with the white light, white fog filled the sky, but it increased the power of the thunderclouds above his head. At the same time, an even thicker bolt of lightning struck down. Once the two of them went all out, their subsequent moves became endless. One of them wasn't afraid of being struck by lightning. No matter if it was a single heavy lightning, a scattered lightning, or a chain lightning array, it was just hundreds of thousands of pores releasing power at the same time. There was no threat at all. The other wasn't afraid of the secret techniques of the Human Sect. His body was like a dead tree, and there was always spring. No matter how mysterious the Huahu Taoist secret attacks were, they were useless against this piece of dead tree, because the Heaven's chosen Taoist didn't have any secrets at all. He had already refined himself into a piece of thunderstruck wood. If he couldn't break my thunder, he couldn't hurt my body. The mutual restraint between the orthodoxies was vividly reflected in the battle between the two of them. It seemed that the battle was going to develop in the direction of mana consumption. The Yang God Supremes communicated with each other and all reached a consensus. The orthodoxies were excellent, and their cultivation was also very profound. However, if they continued to waste time like this, they would lose the original intention of competing. There were still countless battles between countless cultivators. Who would have the patience to watch the two of them waste each other's time here? Since the Yang God Supremes had reached a consensus, there was no point in continuing. A Heaven's Choice Yang God stretched out his hand into the space and threw it. The two of them were forcibly separated. This round is considered a draw. There is no victory and no loss. The spiritual opportunity will be retrieved by itself. No one was dissatisfied. Everyone here was an expert, and there were no small cultivators who couldn't understand. Many people would do this during a battle, but no one was willing to watch. Many wonderful things were still to come. Who was willing to watch these old cows pull a broken chariot? The Heaven's Choice continent didn't get a show of strength, and the people of Joseon didn't get the victory they hoped for. They were a little disappointed, but they could accept it. The following battles were on the right track. Yuanying, True Monarch, Heaven's Choice, and Joseon all took turns to fight. In a short period of time, the outcome of the battle changed. Once you finish singing, I'll take the stage. It was hard to tell who was the victor. This was the normal rhythm of a battle. Joseon's envoys were all elites. Heaven's Choice wasn't stupid enough to send weaklings to make up the numbers at the beginning. With the momentum of Baichangrun, they were all top figures in their respective camps. Everyone knew little about each other. Just as the people of Joseon had a general understanding of the existence of the Heaven's Choice continent, the cultivators of Heaven's Choice also had a general understanding of the 9 great sects of Joseon. They had a general judgment of the roots of each Dao, but they weren't very detailed and occasionally made mistakes. That they didn't understand too much, and there was no way to grind it out. So the competition was mainly about making decisions on the spot. For a time, wonderful moves and unique skills were frequently used. Different worlds, different cultivation ideas, and different understandings of the Dao realm collided with each other, making people intoxicated. However, everyone placed their bets on the 200 purple purity, and no one dared to go beyond that. For the cultivators of Heaven's Choice, because this was the price they gave in the first battle, it was almost certainly a bet approved by the Yang God of Heaven's Choice. Therefore, no one went beyond it to make their Yang God unhappy, and no one went below it to make the people of Heaven's Choice look like poor people. For the people of Joseon, they wouldn't go above it, because if they lost, they would lose 200 purple purity. If they lost again and again, how much wealth would they have to fill this hole? Chapter 1191. Lu Xiaoyi watched coldly from the sidelines. He realized that Zhou Xian had a higher chance of winning in a battle at the monarch level, but was slightly weaker in Yuanying level. This was easy to understand because the Heaven's Chosen Ones had the Great Dao Tablet. They could come into contact with the power of the Dao realm when they were in Jindan. They were more proficient and flexible in using it than Zhou Xian and Yuanying. But once they became true monarchs, the time factor would be erased. Everyone would be old monsters who had lived for at least 1,000 years. Then, the potential of the Dao realm cultivators of the origin world would slowly be revealed. This was because the Dao realm power they grasped was basically comprehended from nature. It was closer to the essence and more in line with nature. The Dao realm cultivators opposed each other, and this was especially obvious in battle. Take the first Taoist Kumu as an example. He was actually very powerful, but Huahu the human sect used his secret technique to restrain him to the point that he was helpless. In the end, the Heaven's Chosen One had no choice but to grit his teeth and admit defeat. If it was another opponent, Taoist Kumu's chances of winning would still be very high, because the cultivators of other orthodoxies couldn't dissolve the power of lightning like Huahu. But Huahu's opponent might not be the same. They were very familiar with energy attacks like lightning, but they didn't have any advantage against other cultivators. This kind of situation happened very quickly, and it happened right next to him. Taoist Hua Yuan's expression was solemn. This time, he was the one who placed the bet first. He couldn't choose his opponent, but his opponent would choose him. It wasn't because he was afraid, but because the direction of his technique was really difficult for a lightning cultivator. This kind of thing wasn't something he could decide. What he was afraid of would happen. Sure enough, as soon as he stepped out, a familiar figure appeared on the other side. It was Kumu who had taken the lead and hadn't finished his attack. Hua Yuan knew he had to take the initiative to attack. Otherwise, under the lightning, sooner or later, there would be a flaw. So, as soon as he entered the tablet, he immediately transformed into soul beasts. A gray bird and a black hawk took the lead to attack Kumu. Carefree, wandering cultivators were good at controlling soul beasts. This wasn't a secret in the Zhou upper realm. Because of their strong spirit and the confidence of the Sparrow Palace, they had a special advantage when using soul beasts. Of course, a strong spirit could be used in many ways and was not limited to soul essence beasts. This was only one of the ways to use spirit. The advantage was that it could maximize the power of spirit through material objects. There were also cultivators who weren't good at this and were more willing to use their mental energy to control various kinds of spells. It was just that their choices were different. Hua Yuan's supreme technique was a set of ancient spirit bird diagrams. There were 12 spirit birds, each with their own unique skills and specialties. Gray thrush, black sparrow, white crane, red sparrow, blue dove, yellow sparrow, green sparrow, purple sparrow, brown sparrow, silver sparrow, golden sparrow, and green rock. Among them, the gray thrush and the black viper were two of the faster ones. The gray thrush's divine ability was to interfere with one's divine sense. It could affect a cultivator's spiritual positioning, and its purpose was to prevent the lightning from striking. The black viper's divine ability was to swallow clouds. It couldn't swallow physical objects, but was best at swallowing rain, wind, and thunderclouds. The two ancient soul essence beasts were very targeted, and it was also the best method that Hua Yuan could think of in a hurry. As long as he could divert and interfere with the dead tree's lightning, it would be considered half a success. Then, he would send out other soul essence beasts with strong attack power, and strive to not give this Taoist a chance to wantonly release lightning. This was the power of the spirit bird diagrams. The 12 soul essence beasts each had their own divine abilities. When combined, it was equivalent to a cultivator having 12 divine abilities. If they were combined well, defeating the opponent was not a problem. When the two beasts were entangled, even if their speed was very fast, in fact, in a split second, the dead tree could reach them before the lightning. After all, lightning was the fastest attacking method in this world, and it was even faster than flying swords. But he didn't do that. Instead, he moved with the lightning. Above his head, there were two cracking sounds, and two lightning bolts struck down, directly hitting the two soul essence beasts that were close at hand. With one strike, it was as if the soul essence beasts were covered in a layer of frost, freezing them from the inside out. With the essence of the soul essence beast's condensed body, it was impossible for them to be restrained by ice spells. However, the two lightning bolts of the dead tree were very special. They were the extremely rare thunder of the North Pole, which specialized in breaking soul essence. Under the rapid freezing, the soul essence beast would have difficulty circulating, as if it was frozen, temporarily becoming a dead object, and its divine abilities could not be used. The dead tree's movements were very fast. Before the two soul essence beasts could recover from the ice, two more lightning bolts struck down. This time, it was the divine thunder, which was the righteous thunder of heaven and earth, specialized in breaking foreign objects. Wherever the purple light passed, two long cries sounded, and the gray thrush and black silk both turned into smoke. This was not an illusory disappearance, but the destruction of Hua Yuan's hundreds of years of condensing spirit. If he wanted to refine these two ferocious beasts again, it would be impossible for him to refine them again without at least 100 years. Lu Xiaoyi watched carefully from below. He realized that the dead tree's lightning spells were very different from the lightning spells of the main world. When he was fighting against the human sect cultivators, the lightning was all removed by Hua Hu using his secret pores, so there was no point in changing the lightning seed. Thus, he could not see how strong this person was. However, when the opponent changed, the sharpness of the dead tree's lightning spells was immediately displayed. The lightning spells of the main world are divided into 8 systems. The 8 systems are the Yi Wood Righteous Thunder, the Yi Fire Yang Thunder, the Gui Water Yin Thunder, the Gongjin Calamity Thunder, the Wutu Infernal Thunder, the Evil Slaying Divine Thunder, the god-slaying demonic thunder, and the life and death purple thunder. Each system is divided into 9 levels, and it seems to be different from this person's, Black Star said in surprise. Yuting explained at the side. He had to let the disciples below understand the difference between the Heaven's Choice mainland and the main world. One chi and spirit, returning to one's roots and returning to one's fate. Walking, standing, sitting, and lying, it's as if it exists. Thus, those who cultivate it use their chi and the fortune of the heavens and earth, can exhale as clouds and rain, and laugh as thunder. The Heaven's Choice lightning, Tao, does not take the normal path. It's closer to the ancient lightning spells, which are divided into the Heaven's Lightning, Jade Core Lightning, Great Hole Lightning, Celestial Capital Lightning, North Pole Lightning, Tai Lightning, Purple Mansion Lightning, Yuchen Lightning, Taishao Lightning, Taiji Lightning, and so on. They all have their own uses and miraculous effects. Only when all the lightning spells are combined together can they form a comprehensive effect. It's not like the main world's lightning spells, where one can walk the world just by mastering one. These are 2 different paths. However, you have to know that although the ancient path is more difficult, and it's very difficult to learn all of the lightning spells, once you learn all of them, its power will be very strong. For example, Martial Nephew Hua Yuan's soul essence beast diagram might be in trouble. The meaning of Taoist Yu Ting's words was very clear. If it was another situation, she would probably have called him down. She would not support such meaningless persistence. On the path of cultivators, there were mutual engendering and restraining. How could there be anyone who could rely on one skill to dominate the world? Taoist Kumu's lightning spells were sharp. If he encountered Hua Hu, he would be depressed and helpless. However, if he encountered Hua Yuan, he would be able to display his abilities to the best of his ability. But then again, if Hua Hu encountered Hua Yuan, his secret pores technique would also be useless in front of the soul essence beast. This was mutual engendering and restraining. There was nothing to be ashamed of. The problem was, the battle scene this time was special. Zhou Xian would not allow the cultivators below to retreat in the face of difficulties unless they could fight to a stalemate. However, looking at Hua Yuan's current situation, once the 12 soul essence beasts were destroyed, how could there be a stalemate? Knowing that he was no match for the enemy, he still persisted in a stalemate just to show Zhou Xian's moral integrity and the will to fight to the end. This was Hua Yuan's sorrow. Chapter 1192. Hua Yuan's movements were very fast. He knew that his soul essence beasts were restrained by withered tree, but as his strongest move, he didn't have any other tactical changes. The path of a cultivator was about confidence in oneself. He couldn't doubt his soul essence beast diagram just because his 2 soul essence beasts were broken. This was a big taboo. Among the 12 soul essence beasts, the Hui Ho and Swan and I were the weakest. It was reasonable that they couldn't withstand the Northern Thunder. He still had 10 soul essence beasts with stronger abilities and stronger soul bodies. It was still unknown who would emerge victorious. The next soul essence beasts he condensed were green and red. It wasn't that he didn't know the danger of adding fuel to the fire, but it was impossible to condense all 12 soul essence beasts at the same time while practicing the soul essence beast diagram. It couldn't be done mentally, and it took time to condense them, even if it was very short. The first thing he did was to condense the gray hoe and black hoe. Then, he began to work on the green hoe and red hoe. His opponent had just finished breaking the seal, and he had 2 more. He was going all out, and there was no consideration of holding back. He was competing to see if his opponent's lightning attack could keep up with his spirit transformation ability. If Withered Tree kept up, he had used up all his trump cards. If Withered Tree couldn't keep up, his soul essence beasts would swarm and tear Withered Tree apart. The battle between the 2 had entered the stage of life and death from the beginning. It could be expected that it would end soon. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. He knew that Hua Yuan didn't have much time left. This kind of life and death struggle didn't have much meaning because he was losing his trump cards. There was no room for maneuver. Moreover, he couldn't even find his opponent's weakness. Or should he start fighting? Or should he fight? This was the disadvantage of not having a stalemate method. He couldn't slow down the pace through escape and techniques and wait for a good opportunity. He could only use his strength and couldn't withdraw it. It was a big taboo in battle. Green's ability was corpse poison, which was very effective against withered trees lightning. Red's ability was silent, which could intermittently restrict the opponent's incantation. For example, Thunder Curse. The first two Soul Essence beasts had just been destroyed, and these two had already rushed forward. However, Withered Tree's lightning ability didn't necessarily require him to speak Thunder Curse. As a high-level lightning warrior, silent incantation was their standard. Two more lightning bolts struck down. They were two bolts of Jade Core Lightning, and their purpose was to remove his divine ability. Whether or not this kind of Jade Pivot Thunder could dispel the opponent's divine ability was still uncertain. It would depend on the comparison of the two's cultivation levels. But for a Soul Essence Beast, one strike was accurate. Just as the divine art was unleashed, the North Pole lightning appeared again and continued to seal the area in ice. The final two bolts of divine firmament lightning solved the problem. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water, truly displaying the strength of Lei Kishi to the fullest, sweeping away the awkwardness of the first battle against Huyuji. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't help but say, "It's time to step down." But no one responded. Although Black Star was also nodding, the two perfected lords of Changdi and Yuting did not move at all. It was not that they did not cherish the excellent seed of the free and unfettered travel, but at this moment, their position did not allow them to show weakness. They could only hope that Hua Yuan would be injured and not die in the end. That would be considered as having done their best in preserving the talent. However, the course of the battle would not follow their wishful thinking. Hua Yuan's Soul Essence Beast came out quickly, but Kumu's lightning fell even faster. Moreover, his response was accurate, fully displaying the keen insight and rich experience of this heaven's chosen lightning task force warrior. In the blink of an eye, 10 of the 12 Soul Essence Beasts had been eliminated. Hua Yuan still did not shrink back. He gathered his mental strength to condense the two Soul Essence Beasts he was most proud of, the Golden Lion and the Green Pung. These two Soul Essence Beasts were the essence of his life. The toughness of their soul was incomparable to other Soul Essence Beasts. Their divine ability was strange, and he believed that no one present could understand it. He was confident that when these two Soul Essence Beasts launched their divine ability, it was hard to say whether they could take down the opponent, but it would not be a problem to protect his safety and achieve a stalemate situation. Because the Golden Lion was the most precious defensive Soul Essence Beast among the 12 Soul Essence Beasts, its ability was powerful. Lu Xiaoyi watched and shook his head. Because Hua Yuan had formed a habitual mindset, he thought that the opponent would definitely deal with his Soul Essence Beast first. After dealing with the Soul Essence Beasts, the opponent would make a move on his body. Therefore, because the last two Soul Essence Beasts were powerful, it did not matter if they took a little longer to condense. But for a real battle expert, why would the opponent be so stubborn? Your Soul Essence Beasts moved quickly, so of course, I could only deal with them first. But if you were slow, why can't I make a move on your body? In the space of the Tao tablet, he could not even say a word. He could only watch as Hua Yuan panicked. The battle progressed as he expected. The dead tree sharply observed the slight delay in Hua Yuan's condensing of the last two Soul Essence Beasts. Suddenly, the Thunder Seed changed, and the immortal dew Thunder shook his soul. Then, the Purple Mansion Thunder destroyed the secret. The last high thunder struck down poor Hua Yuan. The two Soul Essence Beasts were only half condensed. With a long cry, both man and beast turned into ashes. The majestic Tao disappearance celestial phenomenon was formed. Tragically, he became the first person to die in this battle of positive and negative space. Tens of thousands of heaven's chosen cultivators cheered. It was not entirely because they were gloating, but because of Lei Mingshi's sharp attack, coherent combination, and superior judgment. This battle was indeed one to their heart's content, and there was no criticism. There were also people from Zhou Xian who were embarrassed, especially those from Carefree Travel. They felt ashamed. Although everyone was concerned about the safety of Zhou Xian's upper realm, there was still some competition between them. For example, which sect was the first to be killed? Which sect was the first to kill? Which sect was the first to be cleared? Which sect could last until the end and still be intact? These all represented the foundation of a sect. Unfortunately, Carefree Travel took the lead, and it was a bad one. Although Changdi did not show any joy or displeasure on the surface, he could feel his anger through his divine sense. In the next battle, Heaven's Chosen One will go first. I've already told them that I, Carefree Travel, will climb back up from where I fell. The other 8 sects will not send anyone, so I, Carefree Travel, will be the one to take the lead. There's no need to talk about True Lord. If it's Yuaning, one ear you go. Don't hide behind and watch the show. You're a swordsman. It's already been more than 10 battles, and you're still not going up. Can you live up to your sword heart? Lu Xiaoyi obeyed, but he had to explain clearly. I'll follow your orders. However, ever since I entered Carefree Travel, I no longer have a sword heart, only a Tao heart. On the opposite side, Heaven's Chosen One quickly stood up and threw out a purple purity on the remains of the Tao tablet. 200 purple purities. I'm sure Zhongqian of Stone Country. Please give me 1 or 2 pointers. True Lord Wan Yin was still loyal to his duty. He quickly transmitted his voice. Stone Country, a country with powerful physiques. Their Tao realm is complex and not restricted by rules. They're famous for their ability to change. While he was speaking, Lu Xiaoyi had already flown over and tossed out a storage ring. Carefree 1 ear, friendship first, competition second. Chapter 1193. From the start of the battle until now, the words of both sides were very concise, showing the temperament of a great cultivator. There were no harsh words, which was too shallow. Of course, there were no soft words, which was too embarrassing. For example, friendship first, competition second? Was it because a carefree cultivator was killed last time, so he was afraid and lowered his attitude? Sure, Zhongqian didn't care about what he said. To a physique cultivator, attacking was everything. Seeing that his opponent was still there, sure, Zhongqian clenched his left hand. A stone in the sky, it was the sun. With his right hand, a stone appeared under his feet. It was the moon. However, this wasn't an attack stone. With the sun and moon appearing at the same time, his body turned into the 3rd stone. Under the coordination of the 3 stones, he suddenly appeared in front of his opponent. His mouth used the soul-disturbing whistle. His eyes used the soul-swaying technique, and his iron fist used the star-shattering technique. In addition to his 3 stones stabilizing technique, 4 techniques were activated at the same time, firmly locking his opponent in place. A destructive attack suddenly descended. This was his most famous chain divine ability in the Heaven's Choice continent. In the Heaven's Choice continent, those who knew of his abilities didn't dare to get close to him. Because he still had a 5th defensive divine ability, they would all maintain a distance from him and deal with him from afar. This Taoist from Zhou Xian didn't know. He was locked in place by the Heaven, Earth, Sun, Moon twin stones. At this point, he was already powerless. A spell cultivator against a physique cultivator, and even allowed the opponent to get close to him, he wouldn't even know how he died. Was the carefree cultivator from Zhou Xian the weakest of the 9 great sects? Otherwise, why would one of them foolishly release a soul essence beast, and the other stupidly allow a physique cultivator to get close to him? In the blink of an eye, sure, Zhongtian's star-shattering iron fist struck out. He felt that his opponent didn't dodge or run. His gaze was calm, and the corner of his mouth curled up. Then a flash of sword light exploded in front of him. In disbelief, all of his 5 divine abilities seemed to have lost their meaning. Was it the swordsman? The sword-wielding martial saint? This was sure Zhongtian's last thought. Lu Xiaoyi kept his sword and walked out of the Tao tablet space. He smiled and picked up Zi Qing's storage ring. After thinking for a while, He put the Ziqing in his and Shi Zhongtian's storage rings together. A poor man's ambition is short-lived, and a lean horse's hair grows long. Zhou Xian Xiao Yao 1 ear, 400 Ziqing, please enlighten me. In the previous match, he was the one who challenged others. In this match, he was the champion. He was too lazy to go back and forth. He might as well gather them together to make things more convenient. However, when the tens of thousands of people looked at him again, their expressions had completely changed. The Chong flute chuckled happily. Xiao Yao Yu lost face quickly, but he picked it up even faster. Ziqing had doubled the amount and continued to be the banker. Although it seemed casual, what he displayed was his powerful self-confidence. This kind of stare, without any malicious words, was deeply felt by the tens of thousands of people present. She had picked up her face, and it was even prettier than before. It was no wonder that senior brother Whitebrow had specially instructed him to let this person out if he encountered any difficulties during the sparring match. Zhou Xian was comfortable, but Heaven's Chosen was a little embarrassed. After a dozen primordial spirits touched, he had already determined that this person was not a sword-wielding martial saint, but an authentic swordsman. This could be seen from the way he held his sword. However, this swordsman was extremely good at close combat. He could see that physical cultivators were nothing. That was all. His strength was definitely not bad, but he still needed to observe. Shi Zhongtian's defeat was completely due to him not knowing the enemy's strength. The best way to deal with this kind of sword cultivator was to send someone who could grind him down and take out his treasures. At that time, it would be easy to find a different kind of cultivator to deal with him. He gave the order. There were many such cultivators in Taoism. Everyone could grind, and everyone could consume energy. This was the specialty of Taoism. I'm Tiamal from Huan Country. I'm here to fight Zhou Xian. Supreme Wanyan's divine sense followed closely. Huan Country, Taishu Dao has collapsed. As soon as the two entered the space, Lu Xiaoyi did not hesitate. A ray of sword light fell. He had nothing to hide. Even if he only held a sword in the last battle, he could not hide it from the eyes of so many young primordial spirits. Tiamat was not surprised by his opponent's quick sword. Heaven's Choice also had a sword vein, but it was not a legitimate one. It belonged to the category of wild cultivators, and they did not even have a country. In the hundreds of years he had spent as a nascent soul, he had interacted with these fierce fellows many times. All of them were beaten to a pulp by him. Those who knew better would escape early, and those who did not know better would be tortured to death by him. Taoism's method of cultivation could be grinded. This was a natural advantage in cultivation, and it was not surprising. There were a few orthodoxies that were especially good at it, such as Yin Yang, Tai Chi, and Tai Shu. For example, the Tai Shu Dao that he specialized in was the best in defense. No matter how fierce the opponent's attack was, it could be diverted into nothingness through the Tai Shu Dao. It did not matter if it was a large-scale spell, a physical attack such as a flying sword, or various energy attacks, mental attacks, or nothingness. The word nothingness explained the true essence of the Tai Shu Dao. Seeing the opponent's flying sword coming at him, although it seemed casual, he knew that this sword light could split into thousands of rays in an instant. It could gather and divide into thousands of rays, penetrating every hole. To deal with this kind of sword momentum, his experience was to use consistency to deal with changes. As long as it was close, he would be in the void, and the power of the flying sword would be diverted into nothingness. Once the attack did not achieve the desired effect, it would naturally fall into the opponent's rhythm. At that time, he would come out of the void to deal with it. This was the reason why he was standing here. The flying sword fell, but it did not divide. This was a little unexpected, because in his impression, every time the swordsman killed someone with his sword, he would always show off his technique of division, filling the sky with sword shadows. Under the crisscrossing of light and shadow, it was just an old trick of seizing the opponent's will. There was nothing strange about it. The sword did not divide, it was just one. The swordsman did not move, and he did not move either. They both had their own strengths. He did not know what the swordsman relied on, but he relied on his ability to form nothingness in front of him in an instant and divert it inexplicably. This battle, up until now, was very ordinary and unremarkable. The swordsman did not display his ability to divide sword light, and the spell cultivator did not reveal his prowess in Taoism. What were they waiting for? Or were they scheming? It was like two foundation establishment stage beginners. They only had this one skill. There was no backup, no change, no calculation, no state of Tao, and no resonance with the power of heaven and earth. Everyone fought brashly against brashly. To a cultivator of Yuanying's level, such a clash could not even be considered a test. Tiamat's mental fortitude was extremely deep. This came from his understanding of the swordsman and his confidence in his own strength. When the flying sword was less than 100 feet away from him, he just happened to swing it in front of him, and a faint nothingness was produced without a trace of smoke or fire. At such a close distance, there was no time to divide. The swordsman was limited by his sword layer, and had to divide several times before he could form a river of sword chi. Now, it was already too late. The division had only just begun, and the sword had already passed through his body. What was the use? Under the dumbfounded gazes of the tens of thousands of cultivators, this ordinary sword light flew the last 1,000 feet and pierced through Tiamat's body, who was still smiling. The seemingly harmless sword light. Only when it pierced through the opponent's body would it explode with an extremely powerful destructive force. The Tao dissipation was produced, just like that. A famous Heaven's Choice cultivator who dilly-dallied was gone. Chapter 1194. When Lu Xiaoyi left the Tao tablet space and returned to the Zhou Xian cultivators, Changdi immediately threw over a storage ring and promised, "Good. Every time you win a bet, I'll pay you a portion of the wager. As long as you have the ability, even if I have to use up all my savings, I'll help you get it from the sect." As an elder, Changdi didn't have much time to do dafa, but as the leader of the carefree cultivators this time, he was under a lot of pressure. He and Yu Ting were easy to deal with. In a battle like this, it was easy to determine victory and defeat, but difficult to determine life and death. There was still a chance to make up for it after a loss, but Yuanying wasn't an option. Yuanying's life was still very fragile in the eyes of these supremes. There were only 3 of them in total. If one died, the pressure would increase. If 2 died, they would lose half of their strength. If 3 died, they would be completely wiped out. Becoming a commander without an army was a very shameful thing for them. It meant that the strength of the successors of their orthodoxy was very weak, and they would be looked down upon by the Heavens Chosen. Lu Xiaoyi's performance made him very satisfied. Clean and efficient, without the slightest hesitation, it fully displayed the ruthlessness of the people of Zhou Xian. If all the cultivators of Zhou Xian could fight like this, the Heavens Chosen would definitely avoid Zhou Xian when they went out of the origin world. Unfortunately, ruthless characters were always in the minority. The swordsman's performance caused a collision of positive and negative spatial forces to change for the first time. This was within the expectations of the Heavens Chosen, but they didn't expect it to come so quickly. Of course, if time dragged on, the balance would definitely favor the Heavens Chosen side. However, this kind of victory was unrealistic. It was a victory of tens of thousands of people against tens of people. It was meaningless. They had to reverse this trend as soon as possible. They couldn't let it get worse. In the following battles, when the Heavens Chosen stepped forward, they couldn't guarantee that the swordsman would appear. And when the swordsman stepped forward after a round, they had to find someone suitable to deal with him. What kind of opponent could face a fierce swordsman? They had to think carefully. Huang Yin mixed in with the Heavens Chosen cultivators. He was very excited. Around him, there were sword cultivator brothers just like him. As the most combative group on the continent, how could they let go of such a rare opportunity to witness the clash of powers between the positive and negative spaces? Those who could come were all here. There were close to 100 people. Not only Yuanying, but there were also a few supremes and swordsmen. This is the swordsman from the origin world I met in the origin world. At that time, I guess that his inheritance probably came from the owner of the nameless sword Tao tablet. What do you think? Even though the sword cultivators did not have their own country and had many enemies in the Heaven's Choice, they were a group that was not well liked. However, the more it was like this, the more united they were. To be able to choose the nameless sword Tao tablet under the disdain of the mainstream, it was clear that each of them had a certain personality inclination. Supreme's mottled bamboo was one of the few swordsman supremes. He had also been to the sword vein in the origin world, but he still couldn't understand the swordsmanship of this swordsman called Single Ear. I have been to the origin world and have also seen some sword vein. I have benefited a lot from it. However, I still can't see through this person's swordsmanship. Other than using the Void Realm to kill Tiamo, what else can you see? The eyes of the crowd were bright. When the swordsman killed Shi Zhongtian, it was a complete close combat technique. Everyone knew it, but those who could master it to this extent were rare. As for the second Tiamo, he had drawn out the Void Realm, but it didn't have any effect. There were no abnormalities. It wasn't a huge impact, it wasn't a mysterious counterattack, and it wasn't a spatial shift. There was only one explanation. Both were in the Void Realm, but Tiamo's Tao realm wasn't enough, so his Void Realm was useless. This was something that everyone present could see clearly. The problem was that the two battles were abnormally simple, so simple that it made one's hair stand on end. It was as if it wasn't a battle between cultivators, but a casual killing of cats and dogs. It had the cleanliness of a swordsman, but it didn't have the ruthless madness of a swordsman. It felt a little strange. It was a swordsman, but there was something missing and something extra. The swordsman felt the same as Banju. It was just that it felt a little strange. Killing people to solve problems couldn't be more satisfying. Both of them used instantaneous moves, but in such instantaneous moves, there was something missing that made one's blood boil. Is this the style of all swordsmen in the origin world, or is it just a personal style? A swordsman asked. Banju deliberated and said, "It should be a personal style." Shi Zhongtian and Tiamo couldn't force him to use his true strength. That's why we can't make heads or tails of it. Let's wait until a real opponent goes up, then we can come to an accurate conclusion, right? I don't think we can come to a conclusion so easily. Whether or not it came from the inheritance of the nameless sword Tao tablet, don't just look at the surface. The nameless sword Tao tablet was established more than 10,000 years ago. The world has changed, the universe has changed, and the orthodoxy has improved. The sword vein is the same. I heard that the schools of the origin world change very quickly. They don't like to be fixed, so the sword Tao tablet's inheritance is definitely different from the one from 10,000 years ago. Why don't we wait and see? Seeing that everyone was looking at him, Huang Yin was also very cautious. Senior Banju is right. We have to be cautious. When I was in the negative space, I felt that this person's swordsmanship had something in common with the nameless sword Tao tablet. In fact, I've fought with this person before. Their essence is very similar. Of course, he went easy on me. Now, it seems that if I go up like this, it might be a single strike. Banju was very certain. It won't be a single strike, but it probably won't be more than 3 strikes. Not to mention you, even I don't know. This one-eared sword is too special. It's completely unpredictable. Huang Yin nodded. It doesn't matter. There are still many battles to come. In the worst case, we can ask him out alone after the competition to discuss it. Or we can all go to the sword Tao tablet together. The truth will eventually come to light. All these years, the cultivators of the Heaven's Choice continent had fallen into a state of anxiety. Of course, the swordsman was included. On one hand, they were all born and raised in the Heaven's Choice continent. On the other hand, they wanted to find the root of the sword Tao tablet. It was a bit contradictory. In general, they were the same as the majority of the Heaven's Choice continent cultivators. They belonged to the group of people who hadn't made up their minds yet. The specific choice they made depended on many things, including this time's positive and negative space competition. It also included the mysterious origin of this one-eared swordsman. They were very clear that this one-eared sword came from Zhou Xian's carefree travel. However, The problem was that carefree travel wasn't a pure sword vein orthodoxy. How could there be such a great person as the one who created the nameless sword Dao tablet? Then, was there something fishy about the origin of this one-eared sword skill? Or did carefree travel have other secrets? Or was this person just an ordinary person in the origin world sword vein? His strength was outstanding, but it was completely unrelated to their sword Dao tablet's inheritance. Chapter 1195. Because of the little catfish Lu Xiaoyi's interference, the competition began to turn white-hot. In short, Heaven's Choice only killed Zhou Xian, but Zhou Xian killed two of Heaven's Choice. How could the master tolerate this? Whether it was killing or being killed, it was all from the hands of the carefree cultivator. This made Changdi proud, but it also confused Heaven's Choice. It was said that Zhou Xian's Taoist school was led by Qing Wei, Immortal Sect, and Yuan Shidongzhen. Why did it seem like the low-key, carefree cultivator was the one in the limelight? The human sect was also very good. Although they didn't win all the matches, they were undefeated. It was also a very strange orthodoxy. When Heaven's Choice was serious, the range of cultivators they could choose was much larger than Zhou Xian. This choice was targeted by the Dao realm. After every Zhou Xian cultivator made a move, there would be a large group of Heaven's Choice cultivators secretly rubbing their palms. No one would organize this choice. Even if there were tens of thousands of people, they wouldn't be able to do it. But there were two hard principles. First, one had to have enough wealth. Second, one had to have confidence after comparing the opponents. After cultivating to Yuanying, a cultivator's foresight was not small. Self-knowledge was a basic quality of a cultivator. Otherwise, they wouldn't have lived until now. Being impulsive might be a momentary pleasure, but they might lose their lives and a large amount of spiritual energy. According to Zhou Xian's standard of choosing only the top elites, only a few among the tens of thousands of Heaven's Choice cultivators dared to step out. After one round, the winner and loser were tied. But in terms of killing, Zhou Xian was slightly better. He was slightly ahead with 4 against 3. This was just the appetizer. In the situation where most of the methods were exposed, the second round would be more difficult. Moreover, each round would be more difficult than the last, because he didn't have his trump cards, because he was used to being known, and because his characteristics were exposed. This seemed to be very unfair to Zhou Xian. But since they dared to come, they had already expected this. They didn't expect to be tied with Heaven's Choice after 8 or 10 rounds. If the gap between the two sides wasn't obvious after 5 rounds, it would be a victory. Actually, everyone understood the logic behind this. In fact, in the entire competition, the first round was the most obvious. This was because both sides were fighting blindly, without any specific aim. Heaven's Choice wasn't satisfied because they were the hosts. The elites chosen from tens of thousands of people were barely able to fight to a draw, and they were even slightly inferior. This was somewhat unacceptable. The people of Zhou Xian were also dissatisfied because they boasted of being the #1 realm in the universe. Now they were pulled out, and this was it. Both sides gave strict orders and refused to give way to each other. The cruel second round had begun. Among the cultivators of Heaven's Choice, the true experts, those cultivators who were arrogant and didn't care about their status, began to step down one after another. Moreover, because of their will, they all raised their purple purity to 400 strands. Just this one rule alone had stopped countless poor cultivators. There were even 3 Heaven's Chosen cultivators who followed Lu Xiaoyi's example. They first challenged each other and then took the lead. Among them was Bitter Bamboo. His lightning skills were truly unrivaled, and he was invincible. The focus was still on the level of Yuanying because it was too difficult to determine life and death in a battle between supremes. If they really wanted to determine life and death, it would take a long time. At this point, Changdi already had 3 wins and 1 loss. He had taken the lead twice and challenged twice. This was the self-awareness of supremes. You couldn't force yourself and snatch other people's opportunities. Yu Ting had 2 wins and 2 losses. The wins were all by challenging others because he could choose opponents that were advantageous to him and had an advantage in terms of Tao realm. The losses were all by himself, and there would be Supreme's Heaven's Choice who specifically targeted his Tao realm. At the level of Supremes, both sides couldn't break a stalemate. Basically, whoever took the lead would lose, and whoever challenged would win. Black Star was ranked ahead of him with 1 win and 3 losses. In fact, this was very in line with the ranking of Taoists in Joseon. However, this guy was a cunning one. Every time he lost, he would be able to survive. This was also a kind of ability. He was much smarter than the dull Hua Yuan. Among the Yuanian cultivators in Joseon, smart people like Black Star were actually the majority. If they wanted to, they could always find a way to lose and not die. Changdi's voice sounded. Single ear, you have to be careful. Don't rashly fight consecutive battles. You have to preserve enough magic power and spirit for the future. Now, both sides' focus is on sniping the cultivators who are fighting consecutive battles. The tens of thousands of cultivators below are just watching the show. In fact, the strength of the positive and negative spaces is basically fixed. Between the two sides, no one has the power to sweep away the other. Now, the face of both sides depends on the 5 of you. We will choose the most suitable disciples to deal with Heaven's Choice and the other 2. Similarly, Heaven's Choice will also use the power of the sect to challenge you and Shang Yuan. Therefore, don't challenge too often. You still have many battles to fight in the future. You have to preserve your strength. The so-called 5 people referred to the 5 people who had won consecutive battles throughout the competition. Among them, 3 were Heaven's Choice and 2 were Joseon. The other was immortal Shang Yuan from the Primeval Cave. He had won 1 battle and 1 victory. His sect was even before Lu Xiaoyi, and he was also very strong. However, Lu Xiaoyi had a very strange feeling. In his heart, he had always felt that the Buddhist forces at the top level should have a role that could not be ignored. However, in this time's positive-negative space competition, the Buddhist forces' ability had not been displayed. In fact, in terms of ability, they were not even as strong as the few people he had met in the Tiger Realm. Was this the truth? Or was it that the 1,000 Buddha's ascetic Zen had not used its full strength and was hiding something? If it was intentional, what was the purpose of doing so when the realm was in danger? Of course, the 6 bodhisattvas from the 1,000 Buddha's ascetic Zen were also very capable. If they had to be compared, their performance was above that of the Taoists. However, Lu Xiaoyi felt that their skills were not limited to this. Not a single one of the real top cultivators had appeared. With his long experience in dealing with the Buddhist sects, this was impossible. There must be some consideration. What was it? The battle continued. It was a riot of colors. There were all kinds of orthodoxies, Tao realms, strange skills, and wonderful ideas. The spectators were greatly satisfied and secretly sighed that this trip was not in vain. A true hero would naturally stand out. When the all was in the bag, its edge would naturally be revealed. Lu Xiaoyi listened to Changdi's advice and did not go up to play to the gallery. With his personality, he would not covet some false reputation in such an occasion. So what if he won? Would it be easier to reach the upper realm? As for seeking a breakthrough in battle, that was even more nonsense. It was just a joke to fool mortals. Therefore, the second round of challenge was also a relatively weak opponent. The other 4 cultivators who had outstanding performances were like him. They all knew that they were likely to be targeted by the other party. How could they casually continue to battle? Consecutive battles were a display of strength. It was enough to prove it once. If one continued to do it endlessly, that would be a square skull. Chapter 1196. Lu Xiaoyi's ranking was towards the back of the middle. When it was his turn, all the cultivators knew that this was going to be a good show. 2 Zhou Xian and Yuaning experts, 1 swordsman single-eared, 3 battles, and 3 slashes. There were no survivors under his hands. Although the battle didn't look fierce, the result was fierce. A spell cultivator Shang Yuan for battles, 2 slashes, and 2 victories. He was also ridiculously strong. But looking at the results, the one the heavens' chosen people wanted to take down the most was still that swordsman. The sun god had already passed down a decree forbidding irrelevant people from going up. Not only would it be a waste of people's purple purity, but it would also be a waste of a precious challenge opportunity. As for who to challenge, it would definitely be decided by the upper echelons of the Heaven's Choice Cultivator Group. In every round, Lu Xiaoyi and Shang Yuan were both carefully selected. At the very least, in the eyes of these true monarchs, they were the ones most likely to succeed. Zhou Xian single-eared. 800 purple purity. If you have the ability, don't come in. Everyone else was very conservative when it came to spiritual vigor. Only he was an exception. In his opinion, since he was in a fight with his life on the line, what was the point of betting more? Anyway, he was currently very poor. If he didn't take advantage of this opportunity to earn more, was he going to wait until he went to the void in the future? He hated this kind of meticulous work that tested his patience the most. There was also a very deep reason. He was a person who valued karma very much, even if he didn't know much about karma. Excessive killing would bring him unnecessary karma, because his fighting style was to get carried away when he fought. He didn't know how to control his strength. If he really retracted his flying sword, he was afraid that he would be unlucky. There are no good words for cursing and no good fighters for fighting. This was the logic. To a swordsman, going all out was the truth. Therefore, he needed to choose his opponents. What kind of opponents would bring about karma entanglement? That would be those hot-blooded cultivators among the tens of thousands of spectators. If they really came up, would you kill them or not? If you killed them, you would more or less get some karma, because you didn't have to kill them. If you didn't kill them, it would affect the essence of the battle. If you let them go, what would you do? Therefore, raising the stakes was to stop these unorganized and undisciplined people. For them, they might not consider other things before their blood boiled, but they would definitely consider the wealth in their storage rings. But if they were all selected by the Heaven's Choice Cultivator Group, there would be almost no karma, because they would not come out of Ziching on their own, because they were organized and had a purpose. Therefore, in the context of the confrontation between the positive and negative spaces, it would not be a problem for them to make a move on the black spot. He had to maintain his characteristic of being ruthless. He had to make people think that this person had no regard for life. Only in this way could he instill fear in the hearts of others. Even if this fear might not be obvious, it would help him gain the initiative at the right time. For example, his opponents would have to be on guard against his feints. He had no choice but to believe his threats. All these benefits would come into play at the moment of life and death, causing the opponent to misjudge. This was the true essence of being a hooligan. When swinging bricks at each other, whoever retracted their head first would lose. No matter how much you want to shrink back, you have to endure it and bet that the other party will shrink back first. He had to let people know that he never backed down. In essence, the world of cultivation was no different from a street gang fight. The other 4 people had all passed the challenge, and none of the challengers had succeeded. Now, it was up to him who was the most decisive. The onlookers were not only betting on their victory or defeat, but they were also betting on time. Unfortunately, he was in the game and could not bet on himself. The one who came up was a monk. In the Heaven's Choice Cultivator Group, there were not many monks who participated this time. According to the explanation of the true Lord Wan Yin, Buddhism's influence in the Heaven's Choice Cultivator Group was actually larger than the main world, and it was not even 40%. However, he did not see this point from the challengers. Perhaps the Buddhist monks were all focused on Buddhism and were not interested in leaving the negative space. Was this possible? This poor monk wakes up from wandering. I don't have much ability, but I have some money. Sorry for wasting your time. His words were very humorous. Lu Xiaoyi stepped into the Tao tablet space. It doesn't matter if you have ability or not. It's best if you don't have ability. It's fine as long as you have a spiritual opportunity. The two of them stepped into the Tao tablet space at the same time. Instinctively, the moment they entered, their flying swords had already left their bodies. However, when the flying swords flew out halfway, the originally empty space in front of them suddenly changed. In the eyes of tens of thousands of onlookers, they could not see any abnormalities. The swordsman was still moving, his flying sword drawing an arc light. The monk was sitting cross-legged in the air, smiling with his eyes closed. The true Lord Wan Yin did not recognize this monk. The Heaven's Choice cultivator group was too big, and there were too many capable people. He did not even recognize many cultivators in the country. So how could he recognize a wandering monk? However, there were a few cultivators who recognized this monk and knew that this monk had an extremely special ability, pulling people into dreams. Master? Unknown. Origin? Unknown. There were many cultivators like this in the Heaven's Choice continent, and they did not belong to any country. It was very difficult to investigate their Tao heritage in a continent like the Heaven's Choice continent with tens of thousands of Tao tablets. They only knew that this monk was full of strangeness. He liked to watch people enter dreams, and he also liked to invade people's dreams. Of course, he did not do evil, but this hobby was somewhat unacceptable. It was unknown who pulled him here, and he even had to face the fiercest, bloodthirsty swordsman of Zhou Xian's cultivators. The logic was very easy to understand. Since they could not deal with this swordsman in a head-on clash, then they would not use a head-on method. They would deal with him in the dreamland. The flying swords would not be useful, right? The problem was, could the dreamland kill really reach such a level? The awakening monk had also lost himself. Just like the swordsman, his dreamland was very powerful, but it also depended on who the target was. If it was a mortal, it would be as easy as blowing off dust. However, if it was a cultivator, especially a Yuanian cultivator of the same realm as him, then he would have to sacrifice himself. Fortunately, the length of the dreamland was like a lifetime, but in the eyes of an outsider, it was only an instant. Otherwise, with his heaven-defying ability, wouldn't they be at the mercy of others if they were pulled into the dreamland without being able to control themselves? His Tao realm was the Great Dream Realm, similar to the nameless Sword Tao Monument. There were many such monuments in the Heaven's Choice continent. They did not establish a country, did not pass down Tao teachings, and were even unknown to people. They were all established by cultivators with extraordinary talent, created for the purpose of Tao unification. However, some are very successful, while others slowly disappeared from the cultivation world. The Tao of Dreams wasn't as poetic and picturesque as it sounded. It was actually a murderous Tao, because it killed without leaving a trace. The person who entered the dream wouldn't even know what kind of Tao they had fallen into. However, the Tao of Heaven was balanced. Such a murderous, strange, and impossible to guard against would require the dreamer to pay the same price. In the dreamland, he could easily lure people to their deaths, but if the other party escaped his control, then the one who died would be him. This was the so-called dream reversal. Chapter 1197. Lu Xiaoyi rushed toward Zhaoye in a good mood. It was the right time to build his foundation. He would go to Zhaoye and kill the Dog Emperor. Then he would go to Mount Wangding. From then on, he would be free. It was a happy thing in life. Everything was going according to plan, although building his foundation was a bit bumpy. With the blessing of his mother in heaven, it was a daunting experience without any danger. Unknowingly, he could sense that his future path towards the Grand Tao would reach an extremely high level, and now, it was only the beginning. Tall buildings were built from the ground up, and he had to move bricks and mud one floor at a time. When he reached foundation establishment, his speed was naturally incomparable to when he was chi refining, but he was still cautious, because he had never been as clear-headed as he was now. His success in building his foundation gave him a short period of celestial perception, allowing him to clearly understand the changes that might happen to him in the future. In fact, he didn't know that all of this had already happened and existed in reality. Of course, he felt real and was full of confidence. At Mount Wangding, he would board a space shuttle and go to the upper realm that everyone yearned for. He would join a powerful force in the universe and start his magnificent life. The path was so clear. Cultivation was wonderful beyond words. He rushed all the way day and night. In less than 10 days, he arrived at Zhaoye in the capital. He found an inconspicuous inn and stayed there. He still needed to plan carefully. Killing a mortal was not more difficult than crushing an ant to someone like him who had built his foundation. However, the problem was that this mortal's identity was not ordinary. He was an emperor with a large number of troops protecting him. He even had the help of the state preceptor, so he couldn't directly attack him. The mortal army was not a threat, but killing too many people was not good for his cultivation. Although he was an unaffiliated cultivator, he had read a lot of Taoist books. He also understood the so-called karma. The state preceptor was a threat. As a cultivator, if he was qi refining, it would be easy to deal with him. However, if he was also in foundation establishment, it would be very dangerous for him. Because he had just built his foundation was not stable. Most importantly, he had not come into contact with the various fighting methods of foundation establishment. He didn't know what level of foundation establishment the state preceptor was at. In the dead of the night, Lu Xiaoyi dressed up and planned to go to the palace to find out what was going on. He would not assassinate his mother and Aunt Kai Huan. He needed an open and above-board trial, not a sneaky one. Therefore, they were only exploring the way. At the very least, they needed to know the pattern of the emperor's reign. Just as he finished his preparations, and before he could move, he heard a sigh outside the window. He knew that a fellow cultivator had arrived outside, but he didn't know why he was so sensitive to the news. Holding a sword in his hand was also the fighting style that he relied on the most. Although his dream was to become an omnipotent and profound spell cultivator, wasn't this just the beginning? He didn't even know how to cast a suitable spell. Foundation establishment? It sounded nice, but in fact, he was just a boorish fellow who only knew how to hack and chop at random despite having the physique of a foundation establishment cultivator. Leaping out of the window, under the moonlight, a white-browed, long-bearded, immortal-like Taoist with a solemn face was standing in the courtyard, quietly looking at him with a guarded face. He opened his mouth and said, "If there is no evil in your heart, why would you be afraid of others?" This humble Taoist is Du Oz, the current imperial preceptor. I already know the purpose of Little Friend's visit. I have a few words here, but I don't know if Little Friend is willing to listen. Lu Xiaoyi put away his sword and bowed in a dignified manner. "Senior, please speak." "Junior is listening with respectful ears." Du Oz sighed. "I already know about the grievances between your father, your mother, and Emperor Tianda. To be honest, there are grievances, but to categorize it as the enmity of killing your father and mother is a bit too much." Lu Xiaoyi raised his eyebrows. "Senior, what do you mean by that?" Du Oz said seriously, "We cultivators don't lie. There are 3 points that you cannot not know. First, Tianda's actions as an emperor and as a prince are 2 different things. His situation is different, so his actions are also different. As the saying goes, status determines one's thinking. With the country's general situation involved, you cannot ignore it. Second, Emperor Tianda did not directly order the old madam to be harmed, but only humiliated. The heavenly virtue emperor was partly to blame for the incompetence of his subordinates, but it wasn't all because this was an unintentional mistake on his part. Third, according to the rules of Yi country's cultivation world, which are also the rules of this continent, cultivators and mortals are not allowed to disturb each other, especially when it comes to killing. Unless there's a great enmity between life and death, you cannot rashly kill, especially Emperor Tianda, who is in charge of the country's safety. It is extremely easy for him to cause turmoil in the mortal world, causing rivers of blood to flow. You cannot shoulder such a great karma. With these 3 points, I advise Little Friend to be more open-minded and prioritize the path of Tao. Otherwise, decades of hard work will be wasted in a single day. That would be a pity," Du Oz said and floated in the air, slowly leaving. Lu Xiaoyi stayed in the courtyard, quietly standing there. After a long time, he pulled out his sword and tested its sharpness. With a faint smile, he jumped out of the high wall and did his own thing. 3 days later, he had grasped most of the matters in the imperial city. Now all that was left was to wait. There were only a few days left, and he could afford to wait. At night, there was movement in the courtyard. Lu Xiaoyi knew who it was and came out to welcome them. "Thank you for your repeated advice, senior. This junior appreciates it." Du Oz sighed again. "Foolish child, what hatred is there in the heart? Don't you know that on the path of cultivation, the most taboo thing is to harbor hatred? Fine, I came to tell you that Emperor Tianda knows of your mother's calamity. In his guilt, he is willing to announce to the world that he will posthumously confer the title of Senior Marquis to Major Lu. Lu Yao Shi will be a first-rank noble lady, a loyal servant of Kai Huan, and a loyal wife. You can enter the ancestral hall and receive incense. Your second uncle's title of general will be hereditary. Are you satisfied with this arrangement?" Seeing that Lu Xiaoyi was silent, Du Oz flicked his sleeves and left. "Take care of yourself. In a few days, I will come back to find you." 3 days later, at dawn, Lu Xiaoyi made his final preparations. Today was the imperial court meeting, and it was the time for him to make his move. Walking out of the door, as he expected, Du Oz was standing in the courtyard. This time, he did not sigh, but his voice was stern. "Young Master Lu, why bother being so stubborn? You and I are both cultivators. Logically speaking, we should not have a dispute over a mortal, but the world of cultivation has its own rules. I can tell you very clearly that the moment you cut down Emperor Tianda is the moment I cut you down. This heart is clear, and the heavenly Tao is the proof." Seeing that Lu Xiaoyi was still silent, Du Oz was somewhat resentful that he could not meet his expectations. "Think of the hardships of your cultivation. Think of the decades of effort you've put in. Think of the incomparably bright future you have. This person has already passed away. I believe that even if the old madam's spirit in the heavens knew of your actions, she would not agree. The so-called cultivation is to know when to advance and when to retreat, to know when to give up. You use hundreds of thousands of years of your glorious life to exchange for a mortal's insignificant decades of life. How can there be any comparison? Acting recklessly is the greatest taboo of cultivation. Even a wise man would not do it." He flew into the air again. "One last thing. In this imperial court meeting, Emperor Tianda will announce his crimes and announce to the world that Lu province has committed a crime. He will abdicate the throne and give it to the crown prince. Henceforth, he will live a solitary life of penance. As for you, where you will go, please choose carefully." Chapter 1198. Night Illumination Emperor City. Outside the throne room, on a wide plaza, the scorching sun was high in the sky. In the distance, the guards, generals, soldiers, and officials formed an encirclement. At the center of the encirclement was a man wearing a dragon robe with disheveled hair kneeling on the ground. It was Emperor Tianda. Beside him was a young scholar, standing straight like a javelin. Further away in the sky, an old Taoist was floating quietly. The magic tool in his hand transformed into a huge arrow of light, ready to shoot. Ready to shoot, but not yet, because the mortal emperor was not dead. This new foundation establishment cultivator could not be convicted of killing mortals. It was a pity that this young cultivator did not have a master's legacy. For him to reach this step, his own potential was needless to say. He still hoped to make one last effort. "I will not stop you, because I can stop you once, but I cannot stop you forever." This old Taoist does not have the heart to protect a mortal for decades. You must be willing to do it. I have a mirror that can reflect the future. Are you willing to take a look? Lu Xiaoyi smiled and nodded. Du Oz flipped his hand and took out a bronze mirror. It was simple and ancient. Look in with your heart, and you will know your own future. You will have the basis to make a choice. Lu Xiaoyi casually looked into the bronze mirror. Suddenly, clouds and mist appeared in the bronze mirror. Gradually, the mist dispersed, and a bright light flashed, flying horizontally and vertically. Du Ozi exclaimed, "Flying sword? Little friend, your future orthodoxy will be the most decisive sword vein in the universe." Lu Xiaoyi did not comment. The bronze mirror continued to change, and a huge celestial realm appeared. It was a vast snowy mountain, and groups of swordsmen came and went. Du Ozi was in disbelief. Where is this? It must be the upper realm's cultivation holy land. Look at those swordsmen. All of them come and go. Little friend, congratulations. You will be one of them in the future. Your future is limitless. The scene continued to change. A dot of light gradually became clearer in the darkness. It was a cultivator who was moving freely in the void of the universe. To be able to fly out of the boundary, he was at least a Yuanian grand cultivator. The figure became clearer and clearer. Gradually, they could see his figure and appearance. An abnormally familiar face finally appeared in front of the two of them. They saw him moving his sword back and forth, whistling through the air. Wherever the sword light passed, the void beasts would be turned into ashes one after another. Du Ozi almost couldn't control himself. His voice trembled as he said, "Little friend, this is you. This is your future. At the very least, Yuaniing could be a perfected lord. I can't argue. Our continent has finally produced a character." Think about it. If you have this ability, how much can you do for the continent? Maybe we can break into the netherworld and bring old Madam back to life. Sighing endlessly, the bronze mirror slowly lost its luster. Du Ozi was stunned for a long time before he recovered from a shock. Do you think that what's in the copper mirror is just an illusion? That I deliberately drew it to deceive you? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head, full of gratitude. "No, it's all real. This is my future. I'm sure." Du Ozi let out a long breath. The future is the future, and the present is the present. You have your future, and I have my perseverance. Then, after seeing this, what reason do you have to continue? A glorious life of swordsmanship, a long life of at least thousands of years, and a thorough understanding of the universe. Compared to this, what is a mere mortal's life? Is it worth exchanging thousands of years of glory for? Listen to my advice. Let's stop before he dies. There's still time. Countless mortals watching from afar were shocked by everything displayed in the copper mirror. They didn't expect that the descendant of the previous dynasty's Minister Lu would produce an immortal. What kind of inheritance was this? It was clear how to choose. Priorities, gains, losses, let alone cultivators, even ordinary mortals, as long as they weren't fools, knew what to do. As for regrets, since he had already become an immortal, he would have another chance to make up for it. There was no need to be so stubborn now. If he lost the present, how could he talk about the future? Under everyone's attention, Lu Xiaoyi sighed. The time has come. He raised his hand, and the Tianda Emperor fell to the ground. Why? Why are you so stubborn? You're just a foundation establishment cultivator. You still have time to make up for some things. Lu Xiaoyi said softly. The love of family can never be violated. I'd rather be an ant with a clear conscience than a sword immortal with regrets. In addition, I'm a man who aspires to become a Dharma cultivator. The magic tool in Du Ozi's hand turned into a long arrow and shot out like lightning, turning the defenseless Lu Xiaoyi into a ball of light and shadow. There was no flesh or blood left. Following that, the Golden Imperial Palace collapsed in the light and shadow. The surrounding crowd, officials, soldiers, and the distant Jaya city all swayed and became illusory. This also included Du Ozi, who had been floating in the air. His face gradually regained his consciousness. He was somewhat puzzled. Such a realistic dream was taken from the deepest memories of the opponent in the long river of memories, especially during the foundation establishment stage. First, it could destroy one's foundation. Second, the cultivator at this time was still very immature. Their worldview was not formed, their Tao heart was not strong, and their willpower was not firm. Everything was just the beginning. How could there be true persistence? Entering the dream during the mortal period was useless because one had not entered the Tao. Entering the dream at this stage was too difficult. Yuanying's willpower was not something he, who was also a Yuanying, could seize. It could only be done during the foundation establishment stage or Jin dance stage. Find a stage where the opponent's defenses were the easiest to break and lure them into making a mistake. This was his hundreds of years of experience in the Tao of Dreams. Strike a fatal blow when the opponent was at their weakest, destroy their Tao foundation, and end all troubles. Almost everything in the dream was real because the people, the environment, and the events that had existed before were all incomparably real. He only needed to stir them up a little. When the incomparable achievements of the future were truly placed before his eyes, how could a little wandering cultivator who had just entered the Tao foundation restrain his yearning? As long as he let Emperor Tina off in the dream, this person's future would be like a tall building that had its most important foundation removed. The collapse would be right before his eyes. However, this person's persona hadn't collapsed. As the initiator of all this, the price to pay was the dreamer himself. All of this happened in no more than an instant in reality. It was like a nap in the depths of the soul. In the blink of an eye, the sword was still flying and the person was still moving, but Lu Xiaoyi already knew that he didn't need the flying sword to attack, because the monk who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed already had no aura left, toying with the memories of other people's dreams. There would be this day, sooner or later. The cycle of the heavens, karma. This kind of battle ended even faster than his previous few battles. In any case, the sword had been unsheathed before, and he had even seen the sword enter the body. But now, the sword had been pulled back after flying for more than half, and the person who bore the sword's attack had already vanished into the heavens. Was this still a freaking flying sword? It didn't even need a hole? It could kill with a few gestures? The killing of a dream was far too rare. The majority of the cultivators present still hadn't recovered their wits. Chapter 1199. In Lu Xiaoyi's battles, he had fought 4 battles and slashed 4 times. Without exception, all of them ended with a single slash. In the end, he only used half a sword. This kind of strength was simply astounding because one had never even seen his sword light division before. Every opponent died in a strange way, as if they didn't die from the sword, but from some mysterious cause. Could it be that he wasn't actually a swordsman? The flying sword was just a cover, and there was actually something else going on? Only those who truly understood Monk Xinghui's true identity would know the truth of the battle. The matter was obvious. When the swordsman released his flying sword, Monk Xinghui used Dreamland Kill. However, Dreamland Kill didn't succeed, so he killed himself in the dream. It was simple and clear. One thing was for sure, this swordsman was indeed very strange. He was so strange that the so-called targeting methods were even more useless, and the death was even more fragile. It seemed that in the 4 battles, this person had never fought a fair battle. It wasn't that the swordsman wasn't fair, but that the cultivators they sent out to target him weren't fair. A consensus was reached among the higher-ups of Heaven's Choice. Guangchong Bodhisattva, Taoist Ta Luo, and Taoist Kumu, the 3 most outstanding people in Heaven's Choice Yuanying group, were called over by several perfected lords. One of the perfected lords explained, "At this point in the competition, everyone is well aware of the so-called problem of strength in the positive and negative space. Everyone is about the same, and no one can say that they have the upper hand. We, Heaven's Choice, have the advantage in numbers, but if we win with numbers, it's meaningless. Instead, we'll become a joke to the cultivators of the origin world. The reason why they only send a few dozen people is because they want us to win with numbers. In the end, they'll proclaim that they're honorable even though they're defeated. A few dozen people against tens of thousands. How awe-inspiring and righteous it sounds. We can't let them have their way. The senior brother Yang Shun has already decided that we won't give these Zhou Xian cultivators a chance to show that they'd rather die than submit. Therefore, in the 3rd round, Those cultivators who lost more than they won won't fight. The battles of the perfected lords are meaningless too. We'll compete with the best Yuanian cultivators. However many Zhou Xian cultivators can send out, we'll send out a few. Ta Luo asked. Martial uncle, if we were to compete like this, how many would be left? The true monarch said, excluding those who died and those who lost more than they won, there are only 9 people in Zhou Xian and Yuanying who can maintain a winning percentage. On our side, the others have other choices, but the 3 of you have to go up. Furthermore, your main target is Single Ear and Shang Yuan for Zhou Xian. Only if the 3 of you can defeat these 2 can Heaven's Choice be considered a convincing victory. The 3 of them nodded in unison. This was the pride of the anti-space Heaven's Choice. To use a wheel of attrition battle to defeat these 2 was meaningless. Only the 3 of them would take action. They would appear 3 or 4 times and display their abilities in front of the public. Thus, there would be a point of comparison. The true monarch continued. We need another rule. Wait for the news. We can't let the people of Zhou Xian play the victim. This was the feeling of Heaven's Choice after 2 rounds. These people from the origin world were truly cunning. They knew that they would lose after so many rounds, yet they still brought so few people. This was to announce to the world that Heaven's Choice had an unfair victory. Fortunately, it wasn't too late for them to react now. After only 2 rounds, there was still time. After the second round, the competition was paused. The young gods were bickering above, while the Yuanying were muttering below. Everyone gathered together and could roughly guess Heaven's Choice's intentions. Lu Xiaoyi casually asked a question he had always wanted to ask. Martial uncle, since Origin World cultivators can come and go as they please, then it can't be that only our Zhou Xian cultivators are here, right? There must be cultivators from other Origin Worlds, so why can't we see them? Changdi shook her head. What you said isn't accurate. Theoretically, anyone can enter Heaven's Choice continent, but to enter, you must have a guarantor. And it must be a guarantee from a large country. For example, our diplomatic mission this time was approved by many large countries' high-level cultivators. Otherwise, do you think we could enter so easily? If there really were people with bad intentions invading, what would we do? This is also a restriction that only started in the last few hundred years. In the past, it wasn't necessary because only half immortals could enter, but everything changed after the collapse of the Great Tao. Without the half immortals, Heaven's Choice will naturally be more careful. As for guests from other Origin Worlds, there must be some, but if he doesn't say anything, how would we know about such a large group of cultivators? These people are here on their own accord, so it's not good for them to participate in the competition between Zhou Xian and Heaven's Choice. If they rashly interfere, they will only invite trouble to themselves. Lu Xiaoyi knew it would be like this. He was somewhat disappointed, because he wanted to meet people from the 5th ring here. Of course, swordsmen would be the best. It would be very difficult for him to find people in his current state, and it was also impossible for him to loudly shout, "Is there anyone from the 5th ring?" Considering that even if he were to encounter cultivators from other orthodoxies at the 5th ring, they might not necessarily believe his words. Therefore, the most reliable method was to first find Huang Yan from the Heaven's Volition sword range, and then find out if there were any sword cultivators from the main world through him. What orthodoxies were they from? He still needed to plan carefully. Soon, the young gods above reached a consensus. Instead of pooping here, it was better for everyone to have a fight. At first, Zhou Xian's young gods didn't agree, because the cultivators of Heaven's Choice were too strong and they couldn't know all the people who came up. It was disadvantageous for them to give up their strategy of fighting a protracted battle and choose this kind of group battle. However, Heaven's Choice made a concession and promised that the participants would be cultivators who had fought in 2 rounds of battles and maintained a winning rate. This gave Zhou Xian's people hope for victory. Although they knew that this might be an unrealistic ambition, it was still fatally attractive to them. If there was a chance to win, who wouldn't want to fight? This time, the participating cultivators didn't need to take out a bet. Instead, the Yang gods on both sides of the positive and negative space each took out 5,000 eaching to make up a reward of 10,000 eaching, and the winner could enjoy it alone. On Zhou Xian's side, in addition to Lu Xiaoyi and Shang Yuan, there were 7 cultivators from different sections. Among the 9 people, there were 2 Qingwei and Yuan Shi, 1 Buddhist monk each from Wanfo and Bitter Zen, Xiaoyaoyu, human sect, Taixin, Zhonghuang. Among them, Huangting Taoism and Wanyan Zhaoshi were all defeated, which basically reflected the true power ranking of Zhou Xian. In fact, if it weren't for Lu Xiaoyi, Xiaoyaoyu wouldn't have been able to escape this level. There was nothing much to say between the 9 of them. It was too late to talk about teamwork now. True teamwork required a life-and-death commitment and absolute trust. If they couldn't do that, then they might as well rely on improvisation. That way, they wouldn't have to work together for the sake of working together and lose what they were good at. Zhou Xian was like this, and so was Heaven's Choice. The 9 cultivators came from complicated backgrounds. To be fair, this was indeed a duel without bias, and no one had an advantage. Chapter 1200. The voice of the sun god of Heaven's Choice spread in all directions. 10,000 purple purity. Do you all think that we sun gods are too stingy? Dozens of sun gods only gather so much purple purity. Is it too shabby? Purple purity is just a worldly possession. The important thing is the process of finding it. There are countless difficulties and obstacles, risks of life and death. Different people, different environments, different Tao hearts, different opportunities. So it's just a small talk to comfort you. Lu Xiaoyi curled his lips. If they were stingy, then so be it. Why did they have to come up with such high-sounding nonsense? After these 4 rounds, he had earned a total of 800 purple purity. In addition to his original wealth, his net worth had reached 2,000 purple purity. He wondered if it was enough for him to break through to the upper realm. He had planned to make a few more rounds in the next few rounds and get more than 5,000 purple purity. Then there would be no more risks, and it would be enough. But he didn't expect that the old guys would change the rules. 10,000 purple purity was a reward for one party. If it was divided among 9 people, even if some died, each person would only get 1,000 or so. It was still far from his goal. Such an opportunity was really rare. Unfortunately, they didn't give him the chance to make a fortune. The sun god continued, "We value the opportunity more. Where is the opportunity in the Tao tablet space? The moment it completely disappears, the moment the source of the Tao dissipates, there will be an instant opportunity to comprehend the great Tao. Then, next, we will use methods to expand the range of the impermanent Tao tablet space. First, it is to have enough range for a team battle. Second, it is to accelerate the disappearance of the impermanent Tao tablet to benefit the epiphany when the source of the Tao dissipates. Third, we, the Heaven's Choice continent, will not hide the Tao realm and is willing to share it with the cultivation world of the entire universe." As soon as these words came out, tens of thousands of cultivators cheered. The disappearance of the great Tao tablet of the Heaven's Choice continent was not a one-time thing. It needed a certain amount of time to slowly dissipate. It was the Qing Wei Heaven's Daos that suffered the most. But as the manifestation of the Daos in the mortal world, due to the long years of immersion, the innate Tao tablet and the Qing Wei Heaven's Daos crumbled at the same time. But due to the existence of the physical objects, the innate Tao tablet needed time to completely vanish. For example, the Tao of Virtue Steel and the Destiny Steel, after the collapse of the Great Tao, the Heaven's Choice Steel left a long legacy behind, at least 1,000 years. After that, the Great Void Steel left a much shorter legacy, no more than 100 years later. Now it was the Massacre and the Impermanent Steel. According to the previous performance of the Great Tao Steel, it would probably become a dead object in another few decades. Then, before the Great Tao Tablet turned into an inanimate object, there was an instant of brilliance from the source of the Tao, just like a human's final radiance. This was a secret that the heaven's chosen cultivators only understood after the collapse of the virtuous cosmos. Of course, it was not easy for ordinary people to obtain this opportunity to gain enlightenment. It required the strength of a powerful country and communication and compromise from all sides. Then this time, the heaven's choice young gods were willing to use such an opportunity as a reward. It was indeed generous and generous. As expected of their master, it would take decades for the impermanence Tao source to completely disappear. This group battle would definitely not last that long. Therefore, the heavenly blessing Yang God used external forces to forcibly expand the space of the Tao steel, so that it could adapt to small-scale group battles and rapidly consume the remaining power of the Tao steel. As for whether the Tao source would be exhausted after the battle, it could only depend on these people's fated chances. If it was not yours, it was useless to beg for it. Everyone was very happy. Only the three Zhou, Xian Yang gods were disdainful. What Dafa? It was just that the impermanence Tao was too special. Since ancient times, there had never been a major cultivator who used it as a fundamental Tao. It was an extremely rare supplemental Tao among the 36 innate Tao. There was not much difference between having it and not having it. It was very difficult for it to have a fundamental impact on cultivators. If that was not the case, why didn't they use the slaughter Tao to do this? Of course, one couldn't say that a pre-celestial great Tao was useless. Every pre-celestial great Tao was important, and there was no such thing as a pre-celestial great Tao. However, at different stages of cultivation, there were pre-celestial great Taos that were of little use to cultivators. For example, the great Tao of impermanence that nascent soul cultivators used. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, the two heavens' choice young gods came to the ruins of the impermanence Tao steel, took out their Tao weapons, and used them respectively. They were all major cultivators who had a certain depth in the impermanence Tao. This time, they were also very careful because they had never used it before. Although it was theoretically valid, there was no precedent for the specific effect. A moment later, the space of the Tao steel was expanded. It was quite big, so big that even from the outside, there seemed to be a lot of depth that cannot be seen. This was also done in order to quickly consume the impermanence Tao connotation. If the space expanded small, the impact would not be great. It would make the people of Zhou laugh at the heaven's choice for being stingy. After everything was done, a young god solemnly announced, because of the expansion of the space of the Tao steel, the position of the people who enter the space is not fixed. The principle of this competition is that there are no rules, and it will be a fight to the death. Tens of thousands of cultivators felt a chill in their hearts when they heard this. Even the boldest cultivators were glad that they did not take the risk to participate. How many of the 18 people could survive? No matter how capable they were, who could be so sure? It was no longer a matter of pure strength. There was also a matter of luck. If you were unlucky enough to meet a few people, it would be terrible. Daoist Yu Qian felt uneasy and said to Changdi, senior martial brother, I always feel that there is something strange about this matter. Is it necessary for the heavens' choice to be so dafa? Could it be that they are completely confident? Did they do something when expanding the space of the Tao steel? Did they make some secret arrangements that could help the heavens' choice? My realm is not high enough to see through it. What about you? Daoist Chang Di shook his head bitterly. I can't see through it for the time being. Not to mention me. Even Zian Liuzi and the other senior martial brothers can't see through it. Just now, we also communicated with each other. If Zian Liuzi and the other senior martial brothers can't see through it, then it definitely isn't a young god's method. I'm afraid it's a half-immortal's method. Their half-immortals have stayed in Tianza for a long time, so it's very possible that they left behind some tricks. Yu Ting was slightly shocked. Senior martial brother, are we just going to let them be so presumptuous? Changdi comforted him. Don't worry too much. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, it's impossible to be too obvious about being biased towards them. They want to save face. Moreover, you also know that the so-called tricks are indeed powerful, but they all have one thing in common, and that is they are neutral and not biased. Therefore, it's impossible for there to be an influence that specifically targets our Zhou Xian cultivators. If that's the case, everyone's eyes are clear, and we have a reason to stop this kind of cheating. Yu Ting asked, then what kind of tricks do you think it is? Changdi thought for a moment. I personally think that it should be some kind of mysterious borrowing. For example, being able to sense the presence of companions within a certain range. This way, they can quickly form a situation where they outnumber others. Or perhaps there is some kind of law in the change of fate, but it definitely can't be very obvious. For example, you increase your strength a little, and I decrease my magic power a little. It's not that shallow. Chapter 1201. Lu Xiaoyi and the others entered the Tao realm space one after another. However, the cultivators outside could only see a few figures. Most of them went to the distance randomly, out of sight. It made people's hearts itch. Fortunately, before the final source of the Tao dissipated, the Tao realm space would slowly shrink back to its original state. The spectators couldn't see the beginning of the show, but at least they could see the end of the show. It was a blessing in disguise. Just as the two sides entered the arena, in a place far away from the impermanence Tao steel, two young gods stood side by side. Each of them held a matrix technique in their hands. When the wind blew, the matrix technique turned into green smoke and disappeared. Unknowingly, there was a mysterious connection between the two young gods. At such a distance, the two young gods deliberately covered it up. None of the cultivators in the Echo Valley noticed it. One of the young gods curled the corner of his mouth. It's shameful to do such a thing. If it weren't for Senior Brother Pang's instructions, I wouldn't have bothered to do these tricks. The other young god laughed. Stop. Senior Brother Pang also said that it's not purely for the sake of winning, but for other purposes. Why do you have to be so calculative? It's just a dozen yuanying. How many people in the universe don't die every day? Can you be at ease without using the matrix technique? The previous young god sighed. 9-1 cube, lost in the sea of bitterness. It's a pity to use two matrix techniques in such an insignificant place. Senior, are you doing this just to lose face? If you use two matrix techniques now, in the future, there will be two less matrix techniques. The matrix technique could only be made by a half-immortal cultivator. It required realm, comprehension, proficiency in talismans, and the sacrifice of one's lifespan to make these unpredictable things. For a long time, the Tao of Heaven had been very strict on cultivators, especially from top to bottom. Therefore, no immortal would come down to kill a half-immortal, and no half-immortal would easily attack a cultivator in the human world. It was all because of such restrictions. But occasionally, their disciples and grand disciples would need help. What should they do? It was to use the matrix technique. In the cultivation world, the talisman techniques of ordinary half-immortals were generally called talisman techniques, while the talisman techniques of half-immortals who were facing Tao integration were called Tao revelations. Taking the cultivators of the Blight realm as an example, the trump cards that first to fourth Blight cultivators left behind for their descendants were called moment techniques. Only those of fifth Blight cultivators were called Tao revelations because they already had a trace of Tao, breaking through the framework of moment. Not every half-immortal was willing to do this kind of thing. It would have a great impact on one's body. There were even some powerful Tao realm experts who were able to do it, but they would forever lose their comprehension of it. Adding on the price of lifespan, these things were very precious. Even though there had always been half-immortals in the Heaven's Choice continent, these things were very rare. Normally, they would be used and preserved as trump cards. 9-1 cube was a way to use the law of the increase and decrease of luck. Simply put, if 9 people were to fight, their luck would basically follow the direction of their own luck. However, if one of them died, then the luck of the dead person would be divided among the other 8 people, and so on and so forth. This was the law before the great Tao of destiny collapsed. After the great Tao of destiny collapsed, all of the dead cultivator's luck would not be divided among the other 8 people. Instead, a part of the dead cultivator's luck would be divided among the other 8 people, allowing their companions to benefit. Actually, it was to simulate the luck of the 9 people as a whole. If one of them died, the others would benefit. The total amount of luck would remain the same, or it would rarely change. The meaning of this matrix technique was that if 1 or 2 of the 9 people died, there would not be much of a difference. This was because the luck of the others was still limited and could not change the foundation. However, if one side died too much, the increase in luck would start to become terrifying. If 8 of the 9 people died, then the remaining person would benefit from everyone's luck. Now that the great Tao of destiny collapsed, it could not be said that the luck would increase by 9 times, but increasing by 4 or 5 times was not a problem. This would be very useful in a battle. If placed in reality, it was really possible for a meat pie to fall from the sky. This matrix technique was aimed at the side of heaven's choice. However, the lost in the sea of bitterness was aimed at the side of Zhou. The reason was very simple. The matrix technique could only bear one matrix technique. If you receive the second matrix technique, then the first matrix technique would naturally lose its effect. Therefore, you had to choose the matrix technique aimed at the people of Zhou. The lost in the sea of bitterness meant that when the opponent under the matrix technique made a directional choice, there would always be more mistakes than correct. Simply put, when Lu Xiaoyi was choosing a direction, there were 2 points to choose from. Among them, it was the correct choice. If there was a single enemy to kill, or if there were companions to gather, then his final choice would most likely be to choose B. It would not work every time, but in many choices, it would be most likely to be wrong. This was also very important. It could change the situation in the field without revealing anything. It would delay your time and unconsciously put you at a disadvantage. When you looked for friends, you would always be unable to find them. When you met several opponents, you would have several. Judging from the effects of the 2 matrix techniques, there was no doubt that the help of the matrix technique was more direct and more effective. This was also in line with the characteristics of the matrix technique. When used on one's own people, the effect would be good. When used on the enemy, the effect would be passive. There would be resistance and loss in the dark, and the effect would be less effective. When one side was weakened and the other side was strengthened, the situation, which might not have had a big gap, would have a fundamental change. Zi Qing stayed, had an epiphany of the Tao realm, and did not let the goodies flow into the fields of others. Moreover, he would have a reputation of Dafa. The people of Zhou didn't live up to expectations. Who else could they blame? The 2 young gods sighed. One of them sighed and said, "Let's go. It's an eventful time now. The change in Huixing Valley is just one of many things. I have to go to outer space now and organize people to intercept those uninvited guys. I don't have the time to waste here." The other asked, "Why? Are there really people who dare to barge in? In my opinion, it's better to give them a hard time. Otherwise, they'll think that our Heaven's Choice continent is the back garden of the main world, where they can come and go as they please." You make it sound so easy. How many of those who dare to use force are easy to deal with? They have enough strength and strong backing. Before Heaven's Choice makes its final decision, some people are really not to be trifled with. Oh, let's hear it. When it's my turn to intercept them in a few years, we'll know who's the dragon crossing the river. Who's the clay Buddha? I won't talk about others. Let's talk about the fiercest ones. They don't come often, but every 200 to 300 years, 1 or 2 of them will come. Every time, we'll be in a terrible fix. What orthodoxy? It's the orthodoxy of the sword. How can they be justified in trespassing into the human domain? They say that it's not trespassing, but that there's a Tao tablet in Heaven's Choice. You know, that nameless sword path tablet, that thing created by the ancestors. This is a bit difficult to handle. See, I told you. It's the same, no matter who goes up. P.S. Come. Send your monthly votes over. Book them all. Tip them and get high. If you don't have a motivation, Old Fallen has changed a leave of absence in the system. I'll be resting tomorrow. Chapter 1202. Lu Xiaoyi rushed into the space and found that there was no one around him. He used his divine sense to explore his surroundings. There were faint cultivators, auras, in two directions. They were just auras, but they weren't fighting. Moreover, he couldn't tell if they were friend or foe. He could only gamble once. He didn't have any basis to judge. In terms of the detection range of his divine sense, he far exceeded cultivators in the late stage of yuanying. This was because this was mainly dependent on the strength of one's spirit. His spirit had always been his strong point. It had always been like this since he entered the foundation building realm. Cultivators had a certain degree of regularity when searching for things around them. In non-combat situations, the active divine sense could be opened all the time. It was convenient to grasp the real-time direction of things and track them down. However, this method wasn't suitable here. This was a battlefield. If your active divine sense was locked on for a little longer than a few breaths, the other party would immediately sense that someone was spying on them. They weren't stupid. They would immediately take action, whether to escape, meet, or conceal their auras. Therefore, the standard method of searching for enemies on the battlefield was to open the active divine sense to determine the general direction. After a breath, immediately close it, and then close it secretly. After closing a certain distance, suddenly open a long-distance divine sense pulse to confirm, close it again, and continue to track. After reaching the sprinting distance, lock on with the divine sense again and close it at full speed. He couldn't keep his divine sense locked on all the time. It would scare the other party away. At the very least, the other party would be prepared. Randomly choosing a direction, Lu Xiaoyi silently moved for 100 breaths. He estimated that he was almost halfway there, so he opened his divine sense again. What made him depressed was that the other party was gone. There were many possibilities for this to happen. In fact, the possibility of the other party running away wasn't high. They were all here to win. Retreating at the beginning of a group battle wasn't in line with a cultivator's mentality. Moreover, for this person, whether he was an enemy or a friend was still uncertain. The more likely possibility was that when Lu Xiaoyi opened his divine sense to search for the other party was also opening his divine sense. He came to search for the other party, and the other party could also search for the other party. This was the biggest possibility. After all, no one would foolishly wait here. Unfavorable start. Pouncing on empty air. He was a little depressed. For a cultivator like him, whose divine sense was farther than others and whose speed was faster than others, if he took the initiative to pounce on empty air, the other party would also pounce on empty air. He couldn't reach either side. His experience in such a chaotic battle was to not put in too much effort at the beginning. This might also be the consensus of all combat experts. The key to this kind of battle was to survive as long as possible. If you fought fiercely from the start, it would be easy to become the target of everyone's arrows. Blossoming resplendently, withering poignantly. After missing twice, Lu Xiaoyi realized that his luck wasn't good enough in such a situation. Thus, he adjusted his strategy and put more effort into comprehending the impermanence Tao realm here. According to his understanding, these consecutive misses were probably caused by the impermanence of the Tao tablet space, right? For him, fighting was secondary. The key was that he couldn't miss the opportunity to be in the Tao tablet space. When this chaotic battle was over, the impermanence Tao tablet would disappear completely and the opportunity would be gone. His current process of comprehending the Tao realm wasn't through the accumulation of a long time. The 36 great Taoists didn't give him the opportunity to be carefree and unrestrained. He had to find a shortcut. There were many shortcuts, and they couldn't guarantee that his comprehension would be smooth. This included the entry to the Tao realm when he was forming his nascent soul, the impermanence fragment in the Sparrow Palace, his own reading and seeking a teacher, and of course, the impermanence Tao tablet here. When all these were combined together, if he had the so-called epiphany of the Yang God Heaven's choice, it would be very helpful for him to completely understand the impermanence Tao. After all, this thing was not like other great Taoists, and it was rarely mentioned in the ancient books. With this understanding, his actions became casual. He wasn't looking for people, but for Tao. Taoist Liu Yi really sped all the way to meet up. She was a cultivator from the Qingwei immortal sect. Coincidentally, her Tao partner, Taoist Chongkong from the Middle Yellow of Taixien, was also in the team of 9 people this time. The husband and wife fighting side by side was also a good story. In the Yuanning group in the Zhou upper realm, the two of them were a famous couple. Their individual strength was very strong, and the husband and wife also had other joint techniques. They were a very promising pair, and indeed, they had shown their value in the previous 2 rounds of battle. Since they were Tao partners, there were of course some unspeakable secrets in the dual cultivation, which was reflected in the space here. It was that she could vaguely feel the position of her Tao partner. When the two of them combined, the dual cultivation would greatly increase their chances of success. Running at full speed like this, it was impossible to hide the aura around her. Occasionally, there would be auras near her, but under the circumstances where she didn't know whether they were friends or foes, she chose to ignore them. To her, the most important thing was to meet up with Chongkong, which could fully display the maximum strength of the two of them. Especially when she ran all the way here, it made her realize this point. This was because she felt that the speed of her Tao partner approaching her was very slow. This was very abnormal. She knew that the two of them had the same idea when they met in the space. Chongkong was not flying towards her at full speed, which could only mean one thing. He had met a difficult opponent. This was the reason why she didn't bother to provide support. In another space, the battle was in full swing. There were 3 people present, but only 2 of them were fighting, Chongkong and Ta Luo. The one watching from the side was Ku Mu. He maintained his status and bearing, so he only watched from afar and didn't make a move. The Yellow in Taixien was the most orthodox of the 7 Taoist sects in Zhou. It could even be said that it was so orthodox that it was somewhat old-fashioned. Among the 7 sects, the Qingwei immortal sect was more ethereal, and the primeval cave was more mysterious. The Yellow Court and Taixien were the 2 old-fashioned Taoists. One focused on rules, while the other was good at pills and treasures. However, the cultivators from such sects all had one thing in common, and that was that their foundations were incomparably solid, and their cultivation was incomparably profound. Perhaps they lacked some variation, some leaping, and some unconstrained, but just this solidity alone was not something that could be easily taken down by anyone. Just like Chongkong now, his offense and defense were integrated into one. His pills and treasures were dense, forming his own pill realm. There was a world in his pill, outstanding between heaven and earth. Ta Luo's orthodoxy was from the pagoda sect, which was relatively rare in Taoism. Just like how pill cultivators immerse themselves in pill cultivation for their entire lives, all their achievements were only in one pagoda. Since they built their foundation, there was only one pagoda. As their realm increased, the pagoda also became taller and taller with more floors. At the same time, there were more methods and more power. Ta Luo's pagoda was divided into 7 floors. It wasn't the highest in his sect. Among his fellow Yuanning brothers, the highest could reach the 9th floor. However, in terms of combat power, he was second to none in his sect. This was because he didn't focus on quantity, but on quality. The pagoda was divided into 7 floors: tilting ground, ocean viewing, cloud gathering, broken star, black image, lice building, and crownless. Each of them had supreme power, which was the essence of his life. It wasn't fixed to the large-scale spells of Taoism, but a trend from spells to magical powers. This kind of change made it difficult for ordinary cultivators to deal with. It had the strengths of 2 sects, and it was unpredictable. Chapter 1203. Chongkong's spells were also orthodox Taoist techniques that couldn't be any more orthodox. It couldn't be said that he didn't have any new ideas, but he was an orthodox Taoist. When these things were combined together, it was very difficult to educate an unconventional cultivator. All of his attacks had their own rules, and it was clear at a glance. He followed the rules and followed the most ancient Taoist principles. It sounded very old-fashioned, but when a cultivator exerted this old-fashioned way to the extreme, the opponent would also feel uncomfortable, because he had no loopholes and never took risks. All of his attacks and defenses would ultimately depend on the competition of cultivation. Who would dare to compare their cultivation with a cultivator who played with pills? I'll grind you until the end of time. The two sides went back and forth in such an orderly manner. This was Changkong's rhythm. On the contrary, Taoist Ta Luo also played a balance of offense and defense. Who knew what he was planning? The pill's spirit lingered, and the pagoda formation shone brightly. Both sides attacked and defended well, and they were in a stalemate. However, Changkong didn't feel relaxed in his heart. The existence of Taoist Kumu at the side made him have to be 120% careful. These two people were the most outstanding and powerful cultivators in the early stage of the Heaven's Choice realm. Although he was confident that he wasn't weaker than others, he would never underestimate them. Everyone was good at different things. In his situation, no one could think of ending the battle quickly with him. Previously, there was a cultivator from the Great Void sect who wanted to grind with swordsmen, but in the end, he was shameless. However, in terms of Taoism branches, who could be a match for a cultivator of the Pill Tao? As long as he didn't make any mistakes, no one would be able to do anything to him. He was old-fashioned and conservative, but it didn't mean that he was stupid. He knew better than anyone what these two people chosen by Heaven's Choice were planning. After fighting for hundreds of years, he had killed most of his opponents with his honest and inflexible appearance. In terms of scheming, he wasn't inferior to others. Didn't they just want to surround him and attack his reinforcements? They would delay him here and not use their full strength. Then, they would lure Zhou Xian's companions to come to his aid. Finally, Kumu would attack the reinforcements. One by one, they would slowly eliminate Zhou Xian's forces. However, they didn't know that their Taoist companions were among the reinforcements. When the two of them worked together, it would be a completely different scene. Before entering the Tao realm space, the two of them had already agreed on the details of how to meet. Needless to say, if everything went smoothly, it was also needless to say that both of them were in trouble. The most likely scenario was that one of them was in trouble while the other was rushing over to help. For this reason, they designed 3 scenarios. If there was only one opponent, then he would stay where he was and deal with it himself, or wait for his Tao partner to arrive and gang up on him. If the opponent was 3 or more people, then they would move in the opposite direction of the Tao companion. This was also a warning to the Tao companion not to come and help. If there were 2 opponents, then she would slowly move in the direction of her Tao partner. This meant that she was telling her Tao partner that he needed her support, just like the current situation. Zhang Kong was very clear about the strength of his Tao partner. She was not inferior to him. If the two of them worked together, they would be able to advance and retreat freely. Even if they could not defeat the other party, they could still escape. Unlike now, it was difficult for him to escape alone. If he wanted to escape, he would have to use a big move or a surprise attack, which would expose his weakness. In the hands of Lei Qixi, even a momentary weakness would be caught. Therefore, he could not escape. Taoist Kumu stood on the side. Although he looked calm and indifferent, in fact, his mind was not relaxed at all. In such a battle of wits and strength, he could not be careless at all. Among the 3 of them, Zhang Kong was the one who knew the location of the reinforcements the best. Because they had been cultivating together for hundreds of years, the tacit understanding between the concave and the convex had already involved a certain mysterious category. Knowing that his Tao partner was about to arrive, he also began to make arrangements in advance. The worst combination was when his Tao partner was right in front of him, but the two of them could not form a joint force. Therefore, he had to put himself in a relatively free position to receive Lu Yi. It was still the battle of alchemy. This was also what he was most familiar with and most confident in. Without looking, he naturally took out a heavy water pill. This was also used in a previous battle. Its function was to strengthen the power of the Xing pill with the help of the heavy water. It was a relatively ordinary way of supplementing and was very inconspicuous. But in fact, this heavy water pill was different. It was a special netherworld heavy water. Its appearance was the same as ordinary heavy water, but as long as he stimulated it a little, it would become the netherworld heavy water that was feared in the cultivation world. Whether it was attack or defense, it could make the opponent panic in a short time. It would provide him with the time and opportunity to meet his Tao partner. He was a cautious person. He didn't forget about Taoist Kumu, who was glaring at him from the side. Therefore, he quietly took out another cloud-breaking pill and condensed it without releasing it. He knew that it was almost impossible to completely stop Lame Mushy from releasing thunderbolts. Therefore, he focused on destroying the formation of thunderclouds so that the thunderbolts couldn't release their full power. In this case, his ability to resist thunderbolts would be greatly improved. All of these things were used without anyone noticing. To a cultivator of the Tao of Pills, unless you were also a cultivator of the Tao of Pills, otherwise you would be unable to distinguish the specific effects of the countless treasured pills. This required a long period of unremitting research. This was the advantage of pedantic battle cultivators. When Lu Yi appeared 100 breaths away, the situation had an unexpected change. In addition to Lu Yi, there was also a sharp aura brought by a cultivator flying quickly from another direction. The table of dishes was originally meant for 4 people, but now there was one more person. Who was it? Zhang Kong began to get nervous. It would be best if it was a friend. If it was someone chosen by the heavens, the two of them could only choose to escape. Although he was somewhat unwilling, he believed in reason more. Kumu and Ta Luo also conversed. Ta Luo laughed. Blockhead, there are so many people here. Do you have such a good appetite? Kumu's expression did not change. As long as it is not Single Ear and Shang Yuan, the other Zhou Xian people are nothing. Stupid Ta Luo, you stall 2 people and give me 5 breaths of time. Okay? Ta Luo raised his eyebrows. Why don't you stall 2 of them and give me 5 breaths of time? The 2 of them were old friends. As the saying goes, talents appreciate each other. Among the top Yuanian cultivators in the Heaven's Choice continent, they were the 2 who had the best relationship. In the cultivation world, where everyone was in danger, this was not easy. Kumu did not hide anything. My thunder can stall people. Don't make insinuations there. I know what you mean. I will at least leave you one. Is that okay? Ta Luo bargained. 2. Kumu was speechless. This was the old temper of an old friend who liked to compete. 2 it is. I can save some energy, but if you can't deal with them, don't say that I didn't help you. The 2 of them did not mention that there might be people chosen by the heavens among the newcomers. Even if this possibility was not small for them, they could only consider the most dangerous situation and would not base their hopes on luck. Chapter 1204. Lu Yi was the first to arrive. Before she even got close, she threw out a ribbon and turned it into a green enchantment. It was her best skill, the green field immortal trace. The green field expanded and instantly covered the entire battlefield. Lu Yi was the immortal in this area. There was no trace of her. Kumu and Ta Luo were a little arrogant. In their opinion, other than Mo, Air, and Shang Yuan, the rest of the 9 people in Zhou were nothing to be afraid of. However, they didn't expect this female cultivator to be so straightforward. She didn't even see who her opponent was before she rashly cast the enchantment. This was very inappropriate in the normal process of a cultivator's battle. Without knowing the enemy's situation, acting rashly was aimless and aimless. The 2 of them cast their spells to eliminate this green field. However, to their surprise, not only did the green field not shrink, it became even more pervasive. This was not the power of one person. Someone was cooperating with her. In just one breath, the 2 of them understood that this female cultivator was probably familiar with Chong Kong and had an effective method of cooperation. There was no need to talk about it. The tacit understanding formed by countless battles side by side made the two of them instantly enter the state. Taluo didn't hold back anymore, but went all out. He stood on a tall tower that grew in the wind. Ignoring the green field's enchantment, the tower shook, and a circle of tower shadow condensed around Changkong. It was the fourth level's broken star magical ability. It collided with Changkong's netherworld heavy water. No matter how heavy the water was, it couldn't stop the tower from expanding. Taluo was very experienced. Since the two of them knew each other and cooperated, it was better to beat one of them up than to attack both of them at the same time. The other one would naturally be restrained. As for his own safety, he had the tower with him, so he didn't need to worry about his own safety. He started to restrain them here. Kumu had already taken the initiative to welcome the last late guest. Before he saw him, the thunder had already struck. It could be seen how ruthless this person was. He needed to launch an attack as soon as possible. As for what if he hit the wrong person? Then he would just not hit the second time. Kill him? If he was so weak, why did he come here? He didn't hit the wrong person. The last one to arrive was Wu Guang, the cultivator of the primeval cave. He came to help because he felt that there was qi gathering here. He was in a good mood, but his strength was far from his senior brother Shang Yuan's. Before he even saw the enemy, a bolt of lightning struck down from the top of his head. He immediately knew who was attacking him. The Thunder Kishi who had been in the limelight in the first 2 rounds of battle. The orthodoxy of Yuan Shidongjin was very good at various mysterious applications. He could also do this. Compared to senior brother Shang Yuan, the only difference was that senior brother Shang Yuan could perform soul crossing by remote sensing, while he could only perform soul crossing by sight. In other words, he could only perform soul crossing by sight. But now he could not see it. After the first thunderbolt, Kumu knew that this was a primeval cultivator from Zhouxian. After all, everyone had fought in the first 2 rounds and showed up a few times, so he had a deep impression of this person because he was also thinking about how to deal with this kind of Taoist who was good at mystery. Against Shang Yuan, he had yet to think of a good way to deal with him. But against Shang Yuan's fellow disciple, Wu Guang, the way to deal with him was very simple. Don't reveal your whereabouts, and only rely on your aura to lock onto the descending lightning. Leave the opponent with no target to attack, and only be able to passively endure it. Then, the opponent would collapse impassively. It was still the Arctic thunder that was at work. Thunder was the command of the heavens. But the Arctic thunder was the coldest frost. Under the Arctic thunder, it didn't need to sweep away the enemy, but it could have an impact on all things related to spiritual energy, including Hua Yuan's soul source beast. Of course, it also included the mysterious ability of the primeval cultivator. Under several Arctic thunder, Wu Guang knew that things were not good. He could clearly perceive the existence of his opponent, but he couldn't catch up with him because his speed was limited. Because he lost the initiative, he was forced into a passive position by the Arctic thunder. In his consideration, it wasn't a good idea to move freely because he might not necessarily be faster than his opponent. So, he could only use his mysterious ability to make himself disappear first and escape from his opponent's perception. Then, he would think about other things. In terms of how to hide himself in a battle, if the primeval cultivator who was proficient in mystery said that he was second, no orthodoxy would dare to say that he was first. Seize a gap in the thunderbolt, lead the tortoise to disturb the heavens, throw the chips into chaos, and cut off the mysterious connection between himself and the outside world. His whole body was like a dead object, floating out in one direction. In fact, he had a second, more radical method, which was to go against the lightning and strive to find the other Zhouxian cultivators in the fierce battle before he was struck to death by the lightning. But for a cultivator, if he could do it himself, he wouldn't be willing to entrust his hopes to others. Who knew how many of his companions were in the middle of the battlefield? Was their strength enough? Could he do his best to help him? A momentary lapse in thought had caused him to make the wrong choice. Otherwise, if they flew into the green field immortal trace, they would naturally receive the protection of the willow leaves. With the 3 of them working together, No matter how heaven-defying the two heavens' chosen cultivators were, they would still be able to escape safely if they couldn't defeat them. His current choice was harming others and himself. His actions had indeed hidden himself without a trace. The dead tree instantly lost its position on him. A cruel smile crossed Wu Guang's face. Wu Guang would never know that his dead tree's thunder had memories. The remnants of the thunder of the North Pole were still on his body and would not completely dissipate within a few breaths of time. This gave Ku Mu enough time to activate the thunder of the North Pole. After 2 breaths of time, the most powerful Great Hole thunder in his lightning bank brewed and formed. With a crack, Wu Guang, who thought he had succeeded, was cleaved through. Temporarily in the state of breath control, he couldn't display all of his defenses. Under the Great Hole thunder, he was cleaved into a puff of green smoke. 4 breaths. Ku Mu transmitted to Ta Luo. He had fulfilled his promise. Ta Luo defended himself like a rock in the green field immortal trace. He didn't have any good methods to deal with Lu Ye's green field barrier. So he simply stood still like a mountain and followed the supreme principle of street gangsters. He restrained Chong Kong and didn't let go, but opened up his thickest skin in front of Lu Yi and let her attack. This was a very smart strategy. The Qingwei immortal sect was known for being ethereal. They were the best at moving without a shadow, harming others without hurting them. They would leave after one attack and never force things. When it came to female cultivators like Lu Yi, this kind of flexibility was displayed to the extreme. At the same time, it also weakened his ability to break through sturdiness to below standard. First, it was the grass growth technique, but it was ineffective against the pagoda. Then it was the sky attack technique, but it also couldn't penetrate the skin. Finally, it was the invasion of the Tao of Life, but it couldn't solve the most urgent problem at the moment. After 4 breaths of time, the opportunity was gone. Ku Mu turned back. Zhou Xian's advantage in numbers was no longer there. It was dangerous. Should they fight or fight? The experienced Chong Kong immediately made a decision. Leave. The significance of leaving was that they might encounter Zhou Xian's companions. Of course, they might encounter another strong enemy, but there were always variables. Unlike now, when the 2 Heaven's Choice cultivators no longer held back and went all out, he sadly discovered that there was still a gap between him and the other party. Even if the 2 of them joined forces, they might not be able to do anything to the other party. In fact, the best opportunity to escape was when Ku Mu fought Wu Guang. But how could he abandon his fellow cultivator and escape alone? Chong Kong was ready to fight to the death. Chapter 1205. Chong Kong had already made up his mind. He was also a decisive person. He raised a gourd in his hand and threw out hundreds of pills from the gourd. All of a sudden, the green field was filled with dazzling medicinal power. It was originally the enchantment of the green field immortal track. Because of the addition of the gourd pills, the enchantment turned into a huge cauldron. He wanted to use Ta Luo's pagoda as a pill to refine. He waved the pill to form a cauldron and gathered the power to form a fire. Lu Yi understood her partner's thoughts very well. She changed the enchantment of the green field slightly and turned it into a dense mist in the cauldron to increase the power of the pill. She also attacked Deadwood from the side to prevent his lightning. Deadwood looked at it and couldn't solve the art of pill refinement for a while. A lightning cultivator like him was very straightforward, but he wasn't good at the twists and turns of the Great Tao. Thus, he made a slight distinction and focused his attack on Chong Kong. He solved Ta Luo's danger and also couldn't locate Lu Yi in the green field. The situation of the battle instantly became intense. The 4 of them were in a stalemate. While Chong Kong and Ta Luo were fighting each other, Chong Kong was still using the cloud-breaking pill to interfere with Deadwood's lightning gathering. Ta Luo's pagoda was also devouring Lu Ye's green field. Deadwood didn't forget to look for traces of Lu Yi when he was using lightning to attack Chong Kong. While Lu Yi harassed Deadwood, she didn't forget to add more fire to the heaven and earth pill furnace. On the surface, this kind of battle would ultimately depend on the depth of their cultivation. From this point, Zhou Xian and Lu Ye's orthodox cultivation was definitely not weaker than Heaven's Choice. In fact, they were even slightly higher. This was the reason why Chong Kong chose to use the pill to form a cauldron to refine Ta Luo. In this kind of entanglement, Dead Tree was unable to display the speed of lightning. In front of him was vast sky breaking through the clouds, and beside him was Willow Leaf's endless harassment. Although her attack power was not strong, it was endless and continuous. This caused Dead Tree to only be able to display 50% to 60% of his lightning power, which was not enough to threaten vast sky. This was the rhythm of Zhou Xian and also the rhythm of Orthodox Taoism. It belonged to the category of an upright battle. However, the two cultivators from Heaven's Choice weren't ordinary people. Zhou Xian walked the righteous path, but they preferred to walk the unorthodox path. The change started from Ta Luo. Chong Kong had already used his heaven and earth alchemy, but his pagoda had yet to display its true ability. Inside the pagoda, the tarot was the soul of the pagoda. Within the heaven and earth cauldron, the edges and corners of the pagoda were already showing signs of melting. This was the sign of refining the pagoda into a pill. He was not in a hurry. The mana in his body flowed and rushed to the highest level. For a moment, the 7th level of the pagoda shone in all directions. The uncrowned level melted down like mercury. In an instant, the entire pagoda was restored to its original state. At the same time, half of the power of Lu Ye's greenfield enchantment was devoured. Her figure also became vaguely visible. The sudden change caught Zhou Xian and Zhou Xian unprepared. It was obvious that Tarot was borrowing the power of the Willow Leaf enchantment to restore himself. If he could continue like this, Chong Kong's Heaven and Earth Cauldron would never be able to kill him unless he refined his Tao companion, Lu Yi, first. This was not the worst. The worst thing was that Lu Yi realized that her enchantment was already somewhat out of control. Not only did Ta Luo borrow the power of her enchantment, he also used it to create a certain connection with her. It was a connection that could not be severed. The change was continuous. As soon as the pagoda was restored, it expanded and contracted rapidly. The pagoda was inverted. Ta Luo relied on the connection created by absorbing the power of Lu Ye's enchantment for a short period of time and accurately found Lu Ye's position. With this, she was immediately trapped at the bottom of the pagoda. In an instant, because of Ta Luo's magical powers, the situation began to change. The lightning power of the withered tree began to recover to 70 to 80%. As for Lu Yi, who was trapped at the bottom of the pagoda, it was hard to say how long she could last. Chong Kong sighed. He knew that the situation was hopeless. Because of his summons, even his Tao companion could be buried here like him. When a cultivator reached this stage, the only way was to fight. His Tao companion. Sister Lu, I want to throw the pill. Lu Ye's eyes were filled with tears. Brother Kong, even if we can't support each other, we should still walk together. At this moment, Chong Kong showed his responsibility. He did not care about his Tao companion's objections. While he still had some leeway, if he did not send her out, he was afraid that they would really become a pair of short-lived lovers. Pill cultivation, pill throwing was a very profound technique. That was the last step to test the cultivator's power when the pill was formed. Only if the pill was thrown well, the soul of the big pill could be sacrificed. However, he was using it now because he wanted to send his Tao companion out so that she could avoid the pain of being suppressed by the pagoda. For a moment, the entire heavenly elixir furnace shook violently. Accompanied by lightning and thunder outside the withered tree, the virtual furnace expanded and contracted. This cycle repeated 3 times and suddenly exploded. The main force was targeted at the huge pagoda. At the same time, Lu Yi at the bottom of the pagoda was also instantly thrown far away. Ta Luo, who was in the midst of the drastic change, did not panic in the face of danger. With another wave of his mana, he had already swung to the 6th level, the lice building. While being attacked by the pill throwing, the pagoda shrank like a louse and clung tightly to Lu Ye's back like a parasite. At the same time, taking advantage of the impact of the pill throwing, the tip of the pagoda stabbed into Lu Ye's back. This was only a matter of a moment. Chong Kong's efforts did not achieve the desired effect. His Dao companion was also likely to be in danger. His heart was like dead ashes, and he no longer had his previous restraint. Instead, he did not hesitate to use his mana and launched a crazy attack on the withered tree. The withered tree smiled slightly. His old friend's pagoda was indeed magical. Its effect in this kind of positional battle was much better than his lightning. He was not worried about his old friend's safety. That female cultivator's fate had long been determined. Once she was sucked in by the lice building, she had never been able to escape. Now, in a one-on-one battle, without a barrier or the heavenly elixir furnace, it was time for him to use his lightning. Let them send these two people from Zhou on their last journey. There was no future in fighting by the rules. Once the battle situation changed, they would immediately be caught off guard. Lui was thrown far away by a huge force. She could not control herself. Her heart ached for her Dao companion's safety, but she could not return for the time being. At this moment, a heart-wrenching pain came over. It was unbearable. For cultivators, pain was never a big problem. Even if they cut off their hands and feet, they could still endure it. However, the pain this time was extraordinary. It seemed to come from the depths of her soul. At the same time, it was accompanied by a large amount of mana leaking out of her soul. Only then did she see clearly what was attached to her back. Even her divine sense was in chaos. She had lost the calmness that a cultivator should not lose the most. Even if she had lost the power to fling the pill, she was still flying aimlessly. It was as if she was not flying for a certain purpose, but just wanted to relieve the pain by running. Her hair was disheveled. Her face was ferocious, and she screamed. She no longer had the grace of the past. She had turned from a fairy into a ferocious ghost. The lice building formed by the tarot was tightly sucking and swallowing. Its speed was getting faster and faster. Before long, this female cultivator would turn into a human skin. He never dared to show this lice-building technique in front of others. Only a few old friends knew about it. He was afraid that he would be seen as a heretic who respected Tao. However, in this Tao realm space, outsiders could not see everything. It did not matter if he used it occasionally. The key was to win. Chapter 1206. Lu Ye's flight was completely without any direction or target. It didn't matter to Ta Luo. If she met the Heaven's Chosen One, it would be fine. If she met another cultivator from Zhou, he wouldn't mind killing another one. After flying for a while, Lu Ye's spiritual power had dropped to less than 30%. This was a dangerous value. If it went any lower and crossed the warning line, her spiritual power would be lost faster and faster. Lu Yi could feel that her end was coming. Her heart was dead. She was not afraid of death, but she had never thought that she would end up so miserable, being killed by a sword or being thrown to death by a spell. Even if there were no bones left, it was better than being left with a piece of human skin. She had to suffer such great pain before dying. This Taoist magic was too vicious. In the main world, he would be hated by everyone. It was because of this that she didn't have the slightest vigilance. Otherwise, if she was a little more careful before being thrown to death, she wouldn't have to carry such a vicious tower. There was a cultivator's aura in front. Louis didn't dare to take any chances. It was meaningless to meet the Heaven's Chosen One. If she met Zhou Xian's companions, wouldn't they be dragged down by her? Such a sinister and cunning enemy was following behind her. If she didn't notice, she would definitely be unlucky. Since she knew that she would die, she didn't want to drag her companions down. Only in this way could someone help her take revenge. She couldn't send out her divine sense because the cunning Ta Luo had cut off her divine sense in advance. She could only fly to avoid this aura and fly. Ta Luo could control her divine sense transmission, but he couldn't control her body for the time being. He could only let her change direction, but the aura obviously had a purpose. It changed direction as she changed direction. Obviously, this was to fight as an encounter, but in her current situation, how could there be an encounter? There was only a sneak attack. Ta Luo chuckled in her divine sense. You are kind and can't bear to hurt your companions. But others take your kindness as ill intent and take the initiative to come to you. Fine, I will suck him again and turn the two of you into a pair of human skin. What do you think? The fairy of Qingwei Immortal Sect is naked with a strange man after death. Two human skins are hanging there. You don't know if it will lead to rumors from your opponents. This was actually an excuse to infuriate her so that she would break down as soon as possible. The faster she collapsed, the more confident Taro would be in dealing with this possible opponent. He wouldn't have to worry about her causing trouble. Of course, with her current situation, she probably wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. The oil lamp had run out and was not far from death. Even a mortal would not be able to save her. It was impossible for him to leave two human skins for others to see. Otherwise, with so many young spirits present, he would not be able to escape punishment. The speed of this person was faster than expected, because this was a person who had not met his opponent even after circling back and forth. When Lu Yi saw this person, she knew that she was saved, but she wasn't sure if she should approach him. She had too much fear towards this louse on her back. He also knew that the swordsman's skills were all in the sword, but he might not be able to pull off any sinister tricks. Ta Luo was also shocked. Why did he bump into such a guy? As for Zhou Xian's group of 9, both he and Kumu agreed that the swordsman was the most terrifying. What was frightening was that he had been killing in an instant, but he had never revealed his true sword skill. Senior Lu Yi, what's wrong with you? Is it because the battle is too intense that you don't even care about your appearance? The slug has always mentioned you and asked me to take care of you. The heavens have taken pity on me and finally let me see you. Lu Xiaoyi's face was full of concern, and he was full of pity. He was completely unguarded, just like a person who had seen his companion injured and was extremely concerned. Ta Luo, who was on his back, almost couldn't control his thoughts of continuing to lie dormant. He thought that if he didn't sneak attack him, he would be letting down this chance encounter. But he suddenly remembered how the previous opponents of this swordsman had died. They all thought that they had succeeded, and it was all wishful thinking. They all felt that everything was under their control, but in the end, they died in vain and unjustly. In that case, should he repeat the same mistake now? At the very least, they could still fight openly. His current louse form couldn't withstand a beating. The louse form gave him an abnormal absorption ability, but it also gave him a fragile body. At this point, he no longer hesitated and jumped up. The louse form had already begun to transform into the pagoda form. At the same time as he jumped up, a ray of light silently streaked past his original position. That was close, almost got crushed again. In terms of slyness, this swordsman wouldn't lose to anyone. Before the pagoda was fully restored, it was bathed in the baptism of the storm of swords. That ray of light followed up, and by the time the pagoda reached the second level, there were already 100 rays of light, and the pagoda was full of holes. By the time the pagoda reached the fourth level, there were already 10,000 rays of light, and the number of holes had increased. By the time Ta Luo's pagoda reached the sixth level, hundreds of thousands of rays of light covered the sky, and the seventh level of the pagoda could no longer be condensed. This was because Ta Luo had no choice but to focus on repairing the first 6 levels. Tens of thousands of Heaven's chosen cultivators had never seen this swordsman's sword light before, and only he had seen it. There was only one word to describe it: brutal. It was very bitter, because he suddenly understood a truth, and that was to never look at something that no one had ever seen before. That could be luck, but it could also be unbearable pain. In the face of pure brutality, all petty tricks, schemes, and traps were useless. The brick kept spinning like a windmill. Let me ask you, how hard is your head? It was a completely different style. It didn't have Chong Kong's stability, nor did it have Lu Ye's fluttering immortal. It just kept spinning, just kept on. His pagoda could block the attacks, but the flying swords weren't rain. He could also block the large-scale forbidden technique Heaven Falls and Earth Rends, but the flying swords were endless. When quantity and power were perfectly combined, other than swinging like him, there seemed to be no better way. The key was that he didn't even have the chance to swing. Out of the 7 levels of the pagoda, 6 levels were already full of holes, and not a single level could release a divine ability. This was because the wind was leaking everywhere. The pagoda had a certain resistance to damage, and as long as the damage wasn't too serious, it could still be used. But now, his pagoda was about to become a shack, and the wind was blowing in from all directions without any obstruction. Under such a blow, he had no choice but to shrink his pagoda to 5 levels in order to better concentrate his power. He regretted that he should have started to build the pagoda the moment he saw this swordsman. Although he thought highly of this person, it was still not enough, far from enough. In the end, he missed the opportunity, and by the time he reacted, he couldn't even erect the pagoda. If he couldn't erect the pagoda, he was nothing. He couldn't run away either. Taro was very clear-headed. If he couldn't expose himself in front of the swordsman, he would really become a grass target. 5 levels still wasn't enough, so he changed it to 4, then 3, then 2. Finally, the tall building became a bungalow. He was somewhat envious of his companions who died in a single strike. At the very least, they didn't suffer. Chapter 12:07. Fortunately, the pagoda didn't have a foundation. Otherwise, it would have been pressed into the basement. Lu Yi retreated to the distance and stared blankly at the battle. It seemed to be a completely different concept from their previous battle. Previously, they had spent a lot of effort to maintain a balance. Even so, the two of them couldn't do it with all their strength. Ignoring the fact that Ku Mu had quickly killed the other Zhou Xian cultivator, Ta Luo's pagoda divine technique had made the two of them helpless. Now, it seemed that he hadn't used his full strength at that time. He was just restraining them, afraid that they would run away. She had to admit that even if she had been more careful at that time, she probably wouldn't have been able to escape from Ta Luo's unpredictable secret technique. However, such a person was like a different person when the opponent changed. Not to mention resisting, they couldn't even fight back. This was not only a difference in orthodoxy, but also a difference in tactics, and even more so, a difference in philosophy. She was still thinking about whether she should find an opportunity to help. Even if she had to give up her life, she had to keep this vicious Taoist here. But now, it seemed that it had nothing to do with her at all. There was no suspense. It was the kind of complete suppression with no hope of a comeback. She had a new understanding of the essence of battle. Battle was battle, and it should be left to the professionals. As for the two of them, they were Taoist companions. In the end, they were just alchemists, even if he had integrated battle into alchemy. She was just a vase. What she was pursuing was like her immortal track of Oz. It was hard to say whether it was a barrier created to kill people or to satisfy her pursuit of the immortal track of Oz. It was also at this moment that an unforgettable pain came from the depths of her soul. It was the pain of being absorbed by Ta Luo just now. Thus, she knew that Chong Kong had left. Ta Luo wasn't without proof. After his initial carelessness caused him to be at a disadvantage, he knew very well that he couldn't fight head-on. Thus, he chose to take advantage of the situation and chose to endure, and in the midst of enduring, he retreated step by step. The purpose of reducing the 6-story pagoda to 1 floor was very clear. It was to reduce the opponent's wariness to the greatest extent and condense his strength at the last moment. How could his pagoda be so simple? What others saw was only the outer tower, and it was only an external manifestation. He still had an inner tower, and in his heart, it was still intact. As long as the inner tower was not destroyed, it would be easy to repair the outer tower. However, There was no point in repairing it now, because his opponent would destroy it faster than he could repair it. When he reduced the outer tower to one level, he couldn't reduce it any further because there had to be one level for his body to reside in. Next, when the swordsman was satisfied, he would use the inner tower to activate his ability and pass through the last level of the outer tower. Therefore, in terms of attack power, it really didn't matter whether the outer tower had 1 or 7 floors. The 7-story pagoda had 7 powerful abilities: toppling ground, sea gazing, cloud gathering, star shattering, black form, lice tower, crownless. Among them, crownless was the ultimate defensive ability and couldn't be used to attack. Lice tower's body was too weak and wasn't suitable to attack a strong opponent like the swordsman. Furthermore, he couldn't attach himself to the swordsman either. The swordsman was obviously prepared for this ability of his, or he wouldn't have used the dark sword at the beginning. In that case, he only had 5 offensive abilities that he could use. He didn't expect to win, but he hoped to get a chance to breathe and recover all 7 floors of the outer tower. This way, he would be able to obtain a complete defensive state, and then he would wait for his old friend's support. He knew very well that from the beginning until the end, it was already impossible for him to defeat this sword cultivator by himself, and fleeing was even a brainless plan. So, Kumu was his last hope. It was a bit embarrassing, but he couldn't care less if he wanted to save his own life. He had to hurry. The first floor of the pagoda was having a hard time withstanding the hundreds of thousands of sword rays. This was his last shelter. Without this layer, even if the pagoda in his heart was intact, where could he hide his physical body? Just as he was about to activate sea gazing, the pagoda outside faintly reacted. At this moment, the swordsman suddenly teleported and disappeared from his sight. However, the sword rays didn't change at all. They were still crazily stabbing at him. It was exactly the same as when Taoist Kumu killed Zhou Xian's supporter with lightning. A long-range attack that was out of sight. The flying swords seemed to have grown eyes. Hundreds of thousands of sword rays circled around him, leaving him no place to hide. What was worse was that Taro's ability couldn't be activated because he couldn't see his opponent. The difference between abilities and spells was that they could be activated faster and more stealthily, and their power was also greater. However, they couldn't get rid of the awkwardness of not being able to see their opponent. It wasn't like long-range spells or flying swords. As long as I could sense you from afar, I could attack even if I couldn't see you. Taro's awkwardness lay in the fact that because he was in the pagoda, he was also greatly restricted in his escape. How could he outrun flying swords that were known for their speed? If he abandoned the pagoda and fled, how could he ensure that his physical body would remain intact under the attack of the flying swords? If he didn't abandon the pagoda, he could only take a beating. If he abandoned the pagoda, he would be beaten even harder in a short period of time. Because he couldn't use his abilities, all of his counterattacks would be useless. Aggrieved, it was an extremely depressing and sullen feeling. He wasn't much stronger than those who were killed in one move. At least he wasn't depressed. The hundreds of thousands of sword rays not only contained various Tao realm transformations, but also turned into words in the air. Are you depressed? Do you feel wronged? Do you feel that the whole world has betrayed you? Do you feel that the heavens are unfair? That the heavens are unfair? Do you know why I killed you? Everyone loves beauty. I don't object to you turning someone into a widow. However, it's inappropriate for you to turn a widow into something that's neither human nor ghost. What a waste of natural resources. How can others use them? What else do you have to say? Do you need to take care of your wife and daughter? How are you going to distribute your assets? We can discuss it. If the price is good, I don't mind selling you a coffin. Taro left because he really couldn't stand the trash talk. The deep sense of powerlessness and helplessness that he had placed on Lu Yi had now returned to him. He had thought that he might fail in the space of a Tao tablet, but he didn't expect it to be in such a way. Because the outer tower did not have a complete defense, Wu Ming did not appear. As a result, he was constantly being attacked, unable to even find a target to counterattack. His ability was always successful in positional warfare. However, when he encountered the swordsman who was fast and used long-range attacks, his weaknesses were magnified infinitely and his advantages couldn't be used. When Deadwood arrived, there was already no hope. Because Liu Yi had been flying for a few minutes, how could he hold on for a few minutes in his current situation? He could only count in breaths. Before he died, he made a final counterattack. He abandoned the pagoda and transformed to escape. Unfortunately, it was just as he had expected. How could he escape the river of hundreds of thousands of sword rays? He didn't even use a single one of his skills. Chapter 1208. I'm sorry. I can't leave him alive for you to personally take revenge. People like him, as long as there's a chance, they can't be controlled. Lu Xiaoyi apologized. He had never interacted with Liu Yi, but he had heard from the slug that she was a very good senior sister. Thank you. I've troubled you. Liu Yi had already recovered her previous calmness and was still as elegant as an immortal. But Lu Xiaoyi could feel that something had changed in her, which made him very worried. But I'll continue to trouble you. Junior brother, please don't find me troublesome. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. Senior sister, I'm actually the most afraid of trouble. Why don't you trouble others after you go out? He could feel that this senior sister was leaning toward something, so he refused. Liu Yi smiled and said, let me finish my words first. That demonic Taoist lice wound has irreversible effects on me. Whether I can walk out of this space or not, the possibility is not high for me. I can also see that with Junior Brother's ability, I can't help you much. Instead, I'll be a burden. Don't deny it. After cultivating for nearly 1,000 years, if I still can't see this, then I'm really useless. She sighed. Because she had made a decision, she was very relaxed. Don't make me follow you. Leave me some dignity, okay? I have the right to decide my own future. Let me be happy, okay? Lu Xiaoyi was silent. Being a cultivator was a proud profession. Martial Uncle Me was like this, and now Liu Yi was the same. Living with a crippled body was a choice, so was following one's heart. He shouldn't interfere too much. Doing what one should do was the philosophy of a cultivator. Seeing that Lu Xiaoyi didn't object, Liu Yi was very gratified. She was most afraid that this junior brother would force himself for the so-called friendship, and in the end, make everyone uncomfortable. She was a cultivator first, and then a woman second. In terms of wisdom, she didn't think that women and men were different. She took out a few storage rings. Give the things here to my master. I've already left her a letter. You'll know when you see it. I won't say thank you, because what you did for me, a mere thank you, is not enough. Senior sister is useless. I can only owe you a favor in this lifetime. She clasped her hands deeply, then floated away. After flying a short distance, she realized that this junior brother of hers had not followed her. This made her very satisfied. Thus, he stood still and made a hand seal. Life is fleeting, and looking back on 1,000 years, he felt sad. The severity of her injuries was not a lie. It was not that he could not recover in the future, but there was a limit to his recovery. What about after that? There was definitely no hope of becoming a true monarch. So what was the point of living for another 200 years? She had to protect the pride of the Qingwei immortal sect. She couldn't accept the fact that she needed someone to take care of her in this half-crippled state. Even if they couldn't help, at least they wouldn't add to the mess. This was also a contribution to the reputation of their sect. Most importantly, the person she loved most had already left, leaving her all alone. She had nothing left to live for. She did not say anything about Long Sky. He didn't want his grudges to affect other people's judgment. In the world of cultivation, the struggle for the Tao was something she could see clearly. As for Ku Mu, as long as this chaotic battle continued, he would definitely not be able to escape from this junior brother of hers. That was not only his strength, but also his fighting instincts, extreme insight, and meticulous thinking. She did not say anything, but this junior brother of hers knew that there was a louse behind her back. Before Ta Luo could start a counterattack, he had already escaped from her sight. She really had nothing to say to such a person. It was like a rabbit wanting to teach a tiger how to fight. The best way was to say nothing, and everything would be as usual. She was just an example of someone who had lost a battle, and there was nothing else involved. In her current state, no matter who she met in the Tao tablet space, she would die. She also did not want to fight anymore. After cultivating for 1,000 years, it was time to think for herself. When she was alone with Long Sky, the two of them often joked about what they would do if they were separated from each other one day. There was no answer, but each of them had an answer. Although she did not know what Long Sky would do, she had her own method. It was a method that only people who had been intimate with each other for a long time could use. It was a feeling of blood connection. This kind of secret technique could not be spread to outsiders, and to be honest, there was not much chance of success. Hoping to reunite in the next life was even more difficult than reincarnating and cultivating again. It was just a thought, a dream. The main thing was that she was tired, and had no goal. She would endure the gazes of others looking at her as a failure for another 200 years. What was the point of exhausting her master's treatment? According to the secret technique, Lu Yi began a complicated self-destruction process. She was very grateful to this junior brother of hers. At least, he allowed her to finish the last part of her life with dignity. Her last memories were those distant memories, the happy days when she was with Long Sky. After living like this for nearly 1,000 years, she should be satisfied. A figure was moving as fast as lightning, and Mu was following Ta Luo's aura closely. This was originally a glorious victory, and Ta Luo could deal with that woman as easily as blowing off dust. It was much easier than dealing with Long Sky, who was risking his life. However, his old friend had not returned, which gave him a bad feeling. The closer he got, the stronger this feeling was. Ordinary cultivators would not be able to cause harm to a powerful cultivator like Ta Luo in such a short time. The only capable cultivators were those two from Zhou Xian, Imo Air and Shan Yuan. However, even these two people could not determine the winner in such a short time, right? He was very clear about his old friend's strength. He was not as good as him, but his role in a positional battle was irreplaceable. This characteristic was not good in a one-on-one battle, but in a chaotic group battle, it was indispensable. This was also the reason why the two of them worked together. He was very eager to know the truth and was not worried about the possible gathering of his opponents. Where else could they gather? In the battle just now, two of the people from Zhou Xian were dead and one was disabled. That female cultivator did not have any combat power at all. What was there to be afraid of? After a few moments, he came to a space. He realized that this was the place where Ta Luo's final battle took place. Things were obvious. There were still remnants of his old friend Ta Luo in the space. These tiny remnants proved one thing. He sighed in his heart and took a whiff of the aura. After carefully identifying it, he quickly confirmed that there were still very slight remnants of sword aura. It was that swordsman, Imo Air. It could only be him. In a one-on-one battle, Ta Luo, who was good at positional battles, would be in trouble if he encountered the swordsman who could move unhindered. Only that swordsman's powerful attack could break through the pagoda's defense in such a short time. After carefully calculating the time, he realized that the battle had ended just a few moments ago. This made him even more vigilant. Even with Ta Luo's defense, the time he lasted could only be counted in breaths. He had always thought that a lightning cultivator would have an advantage over a swordsman because lightning was faster than flying swords. However, it seemed that the strength of the swordsman's flying swords was beyond his imagination. He needed to be more cautious. Perhaps he should consider looking for a few more helpers. Chapter 1209. Unknowingly, the balance of victory and defeat began to tilt towards the side of Heaven's choice. The people in the game could not understand all of this, but the Yang gods outside were clear about it. Yuanshi Yang God frowned. We only have 3 left, and Heaven's choice has 6 left. This round is dangerous. Xian Liuzi asked. Do you know which 3 are left? Yuan Shi Yang God sighed. Sheng'en is still here. I don't know about the rest. Xian Liuzi said. The space of the Tao tablet is showing signs of instability. These Heaven's Choice people have good timing. Yuan Shi Yang God snorted. Yes, it's not bad. Even if it's left for our own people, it's still a fake Dafa. As the sword light circulated, a Tao disappearing celestial phenomenon was produced. Lu Xiaoyi quickly moved away from the battlefield, some doubts in his heart. His opponent was just a relatively ordinary nascent soul stage cultivator of the Heaven's Choice stage. His attack this time was not neat enough. Or rather, it could be said that his opponent was very lucky and managed to avoid his fatal attacks several times. You can dodge the first time, but you can't dodge the second time. After leaving Lu Yi, he did not meet Zhou Xian's companions again. The only person he met was this Heaven's Choice person, so he was not very clear about the overall situation. However, one thing was clear, and that was that the final victor was not far away. This was because the space of the Tao tablet had begun to show signs of instability. On this point, they felt it especially strongly. When the source of the Tao finally disappeared, there would be a source point, and only at the source point would it be possible to obtain the so-called epiphany. This also meant that the location of the final battle would be near this source point, forcing them to decide who was better. His attitude was that it was better to go early than late. Why hide? If there was a chance, he would kill a few first. If there was no chance, he would run away. If he wanted to block people from the outside, his luck was not good enough. He did not like this kind of cat and mouse. It was tiring to find and difficult to hide. Why bother? With the signs, he did not hesitate to release his aura and let himself become the torch in the darkness, so that they would not come looking for him. During this process, he could faintly feel that there were people spying on him, but no one really came up. It seemed like they were planning to win by relying on numbers. But it didn't matter. If he wanted to leave, no one here could stop him. 2 hours later, he began to approach the possible origin point. He also discovered 2 auras near the origin point. Thus, he guided his flying sword and charged forward. Regardless of whether they were friends or foes, he was the only swordsman out of the 18 people who entered. If they were on his side, they would definitely shout out. If they didn't say anything, they must be the chosen ones. It was that simple. No one made a sound. The moment the flying swords made contact, Lu Xiaoyi immediately understood who he had encountered. It was 2 monks. Among the 9 people of Heaven's Choice, there were 2 monks, Guangchong Bodhisattva and Zomba Lama. If there were 2 of them, so be it. He would just treat it as fighting one. There was no psychological burden. Now that he had fought with the Buddhist disciples for a long time, he had already built up enough confidence. The 2 monks did not move and accepted the battle calmly. Lama Zongba transformed into a golden Buddha, his entire body shining with golden light. Bodhisattva Pingru transformed into a guardian god, lifting a living snake. This kind of battle form was the most ancient way of Buddhism. It still retained the rigid understanding of Buddhism. It was a bit like Changkong's understanding of Taoism. Because it was clumsy, it seemed very practical. The concept of their battle was to drag you into an endless battle of attrition. Do you think it's stupid? However, it was actually the essence of cultivation. The 2 monks looked like a master and a servant, a bodhisattva and his guardian, complementing each other. In fact, it was just a coincidence. The more mediocre one was Zongba, who transformed into a Buddha, while the more powerful one was Pingru, who transformed into a guardian god. The Buddhism of Heaven's Choice was still not quite the same as the main world. It was more original, unlike the main world, which had been changed beyond recognition over a long period of time. The 2 monks were also very direct. They were not far away from the source of the Tao. Their meaning was very clear. They would definitely obtain the enlightenment of the impermanence Tao. If you have the ability, then chase us away. The pitch-black space of the Tao tablet was as bright as day. Not only was there a bright river of sword energy, but there was also the golden Buddha Dharma idol. The collision between the 2 sides was intense, and had their own methods. The monks were always like this, while Lu Xiaoyi was always on guard against the darkness outside the light. There was also a faint peeping gaze. Zhou Xian's situation was probably not good. Those who came to the source of the Tao were all cultivators of heaven's choice. However, it did not matter. He needed to find out the background of the two monks, and at the same time, find out the guy hiding in the dark. Someone was peeping at him from the side, and he could not use his full strength. This was very dangerous in a battle between top-level Yuanying. Just like how Taro could not turn over if he made a single mistake, he did not want to end up in the same situation. The most important thing was that this hidden person might be that lightning Kishi dead tree. Under the lightning, even he could not react in time. He had to be careful. His luck was not good. He guessed wrong again. Ever since he entered the space of the Tao tablet, his luck seemed to have been bad. Outside the source of the Tao, there were two other battles. Dead Tree and Bitter Hand Hua, who were fighting. It would take time to determine the victor. Shan Yuan was fighting another Heaven's Choice expert, and it was not something that could be settled in a short time. These people had all met on the way to the source of the Tao. They could feel the light coming from the direction of the source of the Tao, but none of them dared to give up on the enemy beside them. Relatively speaking, a battle between two people was always easier to control. Once it entered a chaotic battle, some things could not be explained clearly. Lu Xiaoyi did not know this, but with his personality, he would not place his hopes on his companions. He needed to test the strength of the two monks as soon as possible, and then create a dangerous situation to force out the hidden guy. Zonba Lama's golden Buddha was very threatening. The golden light was not for showing off, but more to gain insight into the enemy. Under the golden light, whether it was Lu Xiaoyi's escape or the sword traces of hundreds of thousands of flying swords, everything would be clearly illuminated by the golden light. This was a Buddha that was both offensive and defensive. From the looks of it, it was more focused on defense. The troublesome one was the Guangchong Bodhisattva, who cultivated the guardian deity statue, which had 9 transformations. It was like a broken body, like a double face, like a human head 3 times, like a lion beast 4 times, like a treasured sword 5 times, like a living snake 6 times, like a great pestle 7 times, like a Buddhist banner 8 times, like an owl 9 times. Each statue had its own supernatural power. In the previous 2 battles, Lu Xiaoyi had seen many of them. He had seen the incomparably powerful wielding of the great pestle, the brutality and ferocity of the lion beast, the death entanglement of the living snake, the myriad transformations of the Buddhist banner, and the peck of 1,000 soldiers of the owl. Just these 5 statues of the guardian deity were already difficult to deal with, not to mention the 4 that had yet to be used. The broken body statue, the double face statue, the head statue, and the treasured sword statue. It was not easy to force these 2 monks into a corner. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.